Hi, I'm Kristen Bell. Carvana makes car buying easy. Isn't that right, hun? Dax? Dax?
Sorry, did you know about this 7-day money-back guarantee?
A week to evaluate seat comfiness, you say?
A week of terrain tests? Yeah, I can test the brake pad resistance at variable speeds.
Make sure all the kids' stuff fits nicely.
Make sure our stuff fits nicely.
Oh,
Right. Still need to buy the car. Getting ahead of ourselves here.
Buy your car with Carvana today.
This episode of the Y-Files is brought to you by PDS Debt. Hey, it's me. Thanks for clicking on the compilations. I appreciate it, and I'm really happy they're performing well. I was terrified to do it, but I'm glad you're enjoying them. Today we're doing time travel episodes. Hang on. Hello?
Hey, did you start the thing yet?
Yes, I'm recording it right now.
I said don't start without me.
I told you we're doing this at 10 a.m.
All right, I guess I have to do this remotely.
What happened?
Gertie's at the salon getting a camel toes done, so I have to beaver sit.
Can't Gertie's mother beaver sit?
Yeah, right. All she does all day is smoke Pall Malls while watching reruns of Walker, Texas Ranger.
Walker, Texas Ranger?
Chuck Norris.
I know it's Chuck Norris.
Anyway, the lady is not responsible enough to watch beavers all day.
Okay, let's get back to this, please.
You know the people who skip the sponsor ads have no idea what we're talking about, right?
I know, that's why I'm trying to move you along. All right, time travel stories. They're my favorite. So I've done a lot of episodes on time travel. And if we put them all in one compilation, it would be like 5 or 6 hours long. So what we did was decided to go back to the beginning. And judging by the views on those videos, some of these are going to be new to you. The first episode is 17. Yikes. Called Is Time Travel Possible? 9 Time Travelers Caught on Film.
Clickbait.
Kind of, yeah. But it's about this point in the channel's history where it started telling the story as the story and then debunking at the end. This video is basically a listicle of famous time travel stories that floated around the internet for a long time, and we put them in one video and then debunked what we could toward the end. But before we get started, we do have a sponsor ad from PDS.
Oh, is this the ad where I have a heart on?
Heart on.
Heart on.
Heart on.
What'd I say?
Yeah, I know, Seymour, but it's only for a couple of days.
Human, I'm not gonna beat around the bush. I need some cash.
Well, hello to you, too.
No time for chit-chat. Gertie wants to go to St. Bart's for Valentine's Day.
St. Bart's?
It's a Caribbean island.
I know what it is. Isn't it like $1,700 a night?
Whatever my baby wants, my baby gets. Anyway, the Beavers and I are starting a business, and I need a little money to get going. And that's where you come in, human.
No way. How many times do I have to tell...
Hear me out. I'm having a hard enough time making my monthly credit card payments as it is. Then there's gas, hump supplies, camel chow. You've seen how much Gertie eats. It's fine, baby. I don't mind a little junk in the hump. Anyway, I can't keep up. I just need a teeny, tiny, weeny, teeny, tiny investment. Say, 40 G's.
40,000?
Okay, 45.
Absolutely not.
Oh, come on, you'll love this new business. It's called Beaver Box. We ship wood and wood products. For Valentine's Day, the Beavers are custom wood-shaped heart pins. You wear it for your significant other, family, friends, whoever. Right now, I got a heart on for you.
Did you say you have a heart on?
Yeah?
Yeah, you
What?
probably want to change the...
Look, people are gonna be buying these wood heart pins like crazy. Everyone you love can have a heart on.
Please stop saying it.
Saying what?
Look, why don't you just have PDS take care of your debt?
Oh, I think you just shimmied your way into today's sponsor.
I sure did. PDS has options for anyone struggling with a lot of monthly debt payments. Credit cards, personal loans, collections, medical bills. Everyone with over $10,000 or more in eligible debt qualifies.
Well, if I had good credit, I wouldn't be bugging you for a loan.
Well, there's no minimum credit score required. Good and fair credit is accepted. They roll your debt into one low monthly payment. You can save thousands in interest and fees and pay off your debt in a fraction of the time.
I am liking the sound of this.
PDS is also giving our qualified viewers a free debt analysis just for completing the 30-second online assessment at www.pdsdebt.com/files.
pdsdebt.com/files.
You got it.
Well, this sounds perfect. I'll sign up after the Beavers are done filling the beaver boxes with wood.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable the way... Wait, where are you getting the wood?
Oh, there was a bunch of it in the garage. The beavers say it's delicious.
That's the new hardwood flooring for the kitchen.
Well, I'm sorry. Beaver's gonna beaver. From now on, you just let me know anytime you get wood.
My wife's gonna kill me.
Oh, don't worry about it. Once she sees these pins, she'll forget you. You know what? I'll have the boys carve an extra large pin for you to wear. That way, when she gets home, you'll have a huge heart-on for her.
Is time travel possible? Well, according to physicists, yes. Time travel to the future is not only possible, it's been scientifically proven. But what about traveling to the past? Well, that's a little trickier. But there does seem to be some evidence that travelers from the future have visited us in the past, and may be among us right now. Let's find out why.
The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines. This is very unsettling.
Welcome to the Y-Files, where cool nerds laugh and learn. The human race has been fascinated with traveling through time ever since the human race understood what time was. But has time travel been achieved by future humans? And if so, did they leave us clues that they were here? Well, we've scoured the internet for the best time travel stories we can find. You may know some of them, some may be new to you, some are hoaxes, a few have been debunked, but there are a couple of stories that defy explanation. Let's get into it. In 1950, a New York City police officer working missing persons cases examined the body of a 30-year-old man who was brought to the morgue. The man had appeared in the middle of Times Square at 11:15 p.m. that evening. A witness described him as gawking and looking around at the cars and at the signs like he'd never seen them before. He then tried to cross the street against the traffic lights, was hit by a speeding taxi, and died. Pockets of his clothing had coins and currency that had not been in circulation for decades, yet many of them were in mint condition. He also had items from businesses that no longer existed in New York City, like a bill from a livery stable, a brass slug from a saloon, and a letter postmarked 1876. He also had identification bearing the name Rudolph Fence with an address on Fifth Avenue. Now, the name Rudolph Fence didn't appear in the New York City phone book, and the Fifth Avenue address listed on the dead man's card had been a business for many years, not a residence, and no one there had ever heard of Rudolph Fence. The deceased fingerprints matched nothing on file, and no current police reports fit the man's description. Also, his clothes appeared to be about 75 years out of date. Tags on his clothing had the name and address of a tailor that no one had ever heard of, and his hat, which looked new, came from a shop that had been closed for over 50 years. The investigating officer finally turned up a listing in an old phone book for a Rudolph Fence Jr., a man in his 60s who had passed away 5 years earlier. Now, his widow was still living and said her husband's father, Rudolph Fence Sr., had disappeared sometime in the 1870s. He had gone out for a walk one night around 10 p.m., but was never seen again.
This is crazy!
I know. So a search of an old missing persons report turned up a Rudolph Fence, dated 1876, and the man's clothing and address matched those of the man killed in Times Square in 1950. So that missing persons case was finally closed after 75 years, but a different case remains open. What really happened to Rudolph Fence?
Depending on a trajectory you take around a black hole, you can come out and end up in the past of when you started.
In 2003, the FBI arrested 44-year-old Andrew Carlson for suspicion of insider trading. In just 2 weeks, Carlson had made 126 consecutive high-risk profitable trades, turning his $800 of seed capital into a portfolio worth $350 million. Naturally, the SEC wanted this looked into.
Naturally. People with money don't want anyone else making money.
I can't deny that. Now, normally when someone is arrested for insider trading, they deny it. But during a 4-hour interrogation, investigators got an explanation they didn't expect. Carlson stated he traveled back in time from 250 years in the future, bringing knowledge of high-risk, high-profit stock trades. In his videotaped confession, Carlson said it was just too tempting to resist. He'd planned to make it look natural by losing a little here and there, but got caught up in the moment. So the SEC said he was either a lunatic or a pathological liar, because the only way he could pull this off was with illegal information. And they said he's going to sit in jail until he agrees to give up his sources. But Carlson did not give up his sources. He stuck to his story.
Even in the future, snitches get stitches.
Yup. So knowing he was going to prison, Carlson said in exchange for a lighter sentence, he'd be willing to reveal the cure for AIDS and the location of Osama bin Laden. He also said he didn't care about the money, he'd give it back. He just wanted to return to his time craft and go back to his own time. But he refused to reveal the location of the craft for fear that it would fall into the wrong hands. So bail was set at $1 million and he was put into holding to await trial. And you would think that's the end of the story. Carlson had no family, no friends, and no longer had any money. But after a few weeks in custody, a mysterious, unidentified man posted Carlson's bail of $1 million.
What? Who was the mystery man?
Well, we don't know. The mystery man and Carlson were never seen or heard from again. And even stranger, there's no record of anyone named Andrew Carlson before the day he was arrested.
Hey, question for you.
Yeah?
Did he mention anything about GameStop?
Time travel is possible if you're focusing upon time travel to the future.
Okay, this one gives me chills. Tyson's boxing match with Peter McNeely in 1993 was notable for being Iron Mike's first since his release from prison. It lasted only 89 seconds and was stopped after McNeely was knocked down twice. But the most remarkable moment occurred outside of the ring, where footage shows a spectator holding up a smartphone years before they were invented. The white-colored camera has the distinctive slim-line design of a smartphone with the lens in the top left corner, another innovation associated with modern-day recording equipment. All right, enough talk. You gotta take a look at this.
What is that?
I honestly don't know. Camcorders were everywhere in the 90s, but they were bigger than this, and this guy obviously is holding it with one hand. A lot of people think it looks like an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy, but those wouldn't be invented for years, so...
Time travel! What?
This is a famous photo known as the time-traveling hipster. The image comes from the Broadlawn and Pioneer Museum in British Columbia, and the photograph was taken in 1940 at the reopening of the South Fork Bridge in Canada. When the museum digitized the photo and put it online in 2010, people noticed something strange. At first glance, everything looks right. The men are in jackets, ties, and hats, the women in bonnets and overcoats. But look at this.
Whoa!
This guy appears to have a modern haircut, sunglasses, and he's wearing a graphic t-shirt under his cardigan. And what's that he's holding? Doesn't that seem too small to be a camera in 1940?
Photoshop?
Nope. The museum has confirmed that the photo is authentic and unaltered. So, who is he? Where is he from?
Don't you mean, when is he from?
Quick paths through space-time that seem to be permitted by the laws of physics, although it would require a very high advanced technology, much more advanced than us, to do it.
Out-of-place technology seems to pop up all over the place if you look for it. In 2010, a video called Chaplin's Time Traveler appeared on YouTube, and the clip analyzes bonus material from a DVD of Charlie Chaplin's 1928 film The Circus. Now, the footage is from the film's Los Angeles premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater, and at one point, a woman is seen walking by holding up an object to her ear, and a closer examination, she seems to be talking into a thin black device. What is this? There are no cell towers or satellites yet, so it's not a modern cell phone. Then what is it? She's definitely talking, but there's nobody else near her. Who is she talking to?
She's talking to other time agents. She's saying, this movie sucks. Let's get an In-N-Out burger instead.
Maybe. And a few years later, this happened again. This is footage from 1938 of people coming out of a DuPont factory. And the woman in the center seems to be talking on a cell phone or some communication device, and then puts it away. Now, this video was so convincing that it's been covered by the Huffington Post, Daily Mail, and Yahoo News.
Oh, please.
What?
Yahoo News should change its name to Yahoo Random Words That Should Never Be Believed.
So you don't trust the media?
I'm a fish, not a sheep.
Fine, I got it. Don't trust the media.
Yeah, boy.
Anyway, Hagley's Digital Archive has full scans of every issue of DuPont magazine from 1913 to 1993, and there's no mention of a wireless communication device around the time of the film. So you tell me, who's she talking to?
Mission control on the mothership.
Time travel.
What? Out-of-place technology can be found not just in film or old photographs, but in art created hundreds or thousands of years ago. Here are a few famous ones. In 2008, a team of archaeologists had made a puzzling discovery. The team included some journalists. They were filming a documentary at a dig site at a sealed tomb dating to the Ming Dynasty at Shaanxi, northern China. As one of the coffins were being cleared of soil before being opened, a strange metallic object was found. It was a small golden ring with a watch face on its front, approximately 2 millimeters thick. Tiny hands on the watch showed the time had frozen at 10:06. And most astonishing of all, the back of the watch had the word Swiss engraved in English. Now, the tomb had been sealed for 400 years, and the watch itself was already 100 years old when it was placed inside. That dates to the 15th or 16th century. Switzerland wasn't even known by that name in English until 1848.
This is like a time traveler lost and found.
It kinda is. The Spanish city of Salamanca features a cathedral built in 1102. The carvings are pretty typical for the 12th century. Winding vines and leaves, gargoyles, demons, no big whoop. But what the heck is this? That appears to be a modern astronaut wearing a spacesuit. And not just a random spacesuit. This particular suit has features specific to the Apollo 11 EMU worn by Buzz Aldrin. You can see the helmet, the backpack, which held the primary life support system, and oxygen umbilical cords.
Gills are so underrated.
They are. But what really got me were the boots. They feature deep treads that would be used to explore dusty extraterrestrial surfaces like the moon and Mars. And he appears to be floating like he's on a spacewalk. So how could the artists have predicted all these details almost 900 years before they were invented?
1.21 gigawatts! Great Scott!
Okay, these stories are certainly fun, but are they real? Can they be explained? Maybe. You be the judge. Let's go through them. The case of Rudolph Fentz is an urban legend that's been around since the 1970s, maybe even earlier. I first heard it from my dad when I was a kid. But it's not true. It's actually an excerpt from a short story called I'm Scared, which was written by Jack Finney, who you might know as the author of The Body Snatchers. The story was published in Collier's magazine in 1951, about the time when Rudolph Fentz supposedly appeared.
Nice to believe it.
I know you do. The Andrew Carlson story is one of my favorites. I love this one. It has all the makings of a great conspiracy. Millions of dollars, a mysterious benefactor, a missing person. But this one originated as a fictional piece in Weekly World News, a satirical newspaper. Later, the story was picked up by Yahoo News, so naturally people believed the story. It was then reported by other newspapers and magazines as fact, and this drove word of mouth, creating one of the great modern urban legends.
So, the lesson here is...
Don't believe anything the media says?
You're learning.
Okay, so the Mike Tyson fight. Although the device in the video does resemble a type of camera phone not sold until years later, it also could be one of a number of handheld cameras that were in fact widely available. The resolution and size of the original video make it difficult to determine the specific features of the device, but some believe it's similar to either the Casio QV-10A, the Casio QV-100, or the Logitech Photoman. So, debunked? Probably. Maybe. I'm not sure. If you think you know what kind of camera that is, please let us know in the comments. The idea that the hipster in the photograph is a time traveler hinges on 3 items that appear to be too modern for 1940. A logo t-shirt, a small portable camera, and the wraparound sunglasses. But all of those items were readily available in the 1940s. The internet says he's wearing a Montreal Maroons embroidered jersey, and the Maroons were a hockey team that played in the NHL from 1924 to 1938. Okay. While glasses with protective side shields were not widespread, you could get them in 1940. And the camera in his hand? There definitely were cameras that small back then. They were unusual and they were pretty expensive, but they did exist. So, debunked?
Nope.
The woman on the cell phone, quote unquote, in the Charlie Chaplin clip, is thought to be using an early hearing aid. Though I'm not sure why she's talking to herself and looking around like people do when they're on the phone, but she could be talking to herself. I mean, I do that when I'm alone.
Do we really want to discuss what you do when you're alone?
No, I don't. But the DuPont video from 1938 is a little trickier. After the story went viral, the woman's family claimed that her name was Gertrude Jones, and she was working for DuPont and using an experimental wireless telephone developed by the company. Okay, that's fine, but look at the size of it. The earliest cell phones were huge, and this is before World War II. So you're telling me we had the technology to make batteries that small? Okay, fine. Let's say the battery technology did exist. It wouldn't be big enough to power a wireless radio. The walkie-talkie was only patented in 1936, and in the war, radio operators were followed around by another guy with a backpack that carried the transceiver and battery, which weighed over 30 pounds, or 18 kilograms. Still heavy. So I don't know if this one is debunked. The ancient watch found in the Chinese tomb, that's a straight-up hoax. Photoshopped. Debunked. The astronaut on the Cathedral of Salamanca? Well, the sculpture is definitely real, but when the cathedral was renovated and restored in 1992, the artist added their own modern touches, including the astronaut. Debunked.
Crap, those were good ones.
I know, they were. But 300 or 400 years from now, when someone looks at that church, they are going to be confused.
They say time is the fire in which we burn.
So why do we want so badly for these stories to be true? Why are we so obsessed with time travel? Well, probably because we're obsessed with time. Time rules our lives. Time creates possibilities, but time also ends possibilities. It's finite. The expression time is money isn't exactly true. Time is much more valuable than money. Wealth can be made and lost and made again, but time, once we lose it, we can never get it back. Time is the most valuable thing you have. Spend it wisely.
3+1,5+00.
And Cheek's filling out a little there, sport.
Yeah, I put on a little weight during COVID, so
Tell the people how much.
I'd rather not.
35 pounds.
Thanks.
2 weeks to flatten the curve was actually 2 years to fatten the face.
Okay, that's enough. Once I realized I was...
Chubby.
Right, I was able to lose most of the weight pretty quickly.
Yeah, how'd you lose the weight so fast?
Honestly, I ate nothing but tuna for 60 straight days.
Tuna?
Yep.
Tuna fish?
Yes.
You sick son of a...
All right. Next up is a video about Project Stargate. Project Stargate is the CIA program where they tried to train psychic spies to remote view places around the Earth. Remote viewing is projecting your consciousness to any time or place on Earth or beyond. This episode is, let me see, video number 36.
Were you still in your fat phase here?
Yep. And the lighting is screwed up, so it's really, really unflattering.
Can't put lipstick on a pig.
Stop it. It's only 9 minutes long, so I'll see you in a minute.
When the first human visits Mars, it will be the biggest scientific breakthrough since landing on the moon. Probably bigger. But what if I told you the CIA and United States military have already been to Mars? But they didn't use spaceships to get there. They used psychics. Let's find out why. The Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union involved a lot more than spy planes and secret agents. The two countries have spent billions on some crazy projects, like the CIA's Operation Acoustic Kitty.
Okay, I'll bite. What the hell is an acoustic kitty?
I'm glad you asked. Acoustic Kitty involved implanting a microphone into a cat's ear canal and a transmitter at the base of its skull. And its job was to listen in on two men having a conversation in a park outside a Soviet compound in Washington, D.C.
Did the cat hear anything?
Just the sound of a taxi horn.
No, boy, do you mean?
Yep, it was hit by a car as soon as it was let out of its cage.
Ugh, what did that little experiment cost?
$20 million. And one perfectly good cat.
Ouch.
And the Russians experimented with using low-frequency radio waves to control the brains of dogs.
I didn't know dogs had brains.
In 1972, a classified report was circulating in the American intelligence community. The report claimed that the Soviet Union was pouring millions into programs to research ESP, mind reading, and telekinesis, all for the purpose of espionage. And this made the CIA nervous, so they immediately requested funding to develop their own program to train psychic spies.
Did they get the funding? Sorry, stupid question.
Later that year, the CIA, U.S. Army, and Defense Intelligence Agency set up secret facilities all over the country and recruited people who claimed to have ESP. And researchers were specifically interested in people who were skilled in remote viewing.
Which is?
Exactly what it sounds like. A psychic in one location describes what they see in another location.
And they actually found people who could do this?
Well, in 1976, a Russian bomber went down in the Congo, and the details of the crash were sent to CIA psychic researchers operating out of Patterson Air Base in Ohio. There, a psychic named Rosemary Smith drew maps of the Congo and pointed to a specific place where she claimed the plane was. So, a paramilitary unit was dispatched to that location.
They found the plane?
They found the plane.
Whoa!
The CIA was convinced they were onto something. So the various psychic projects going on around the country, and there were quite a few of them, were all consolidated to Fort Meade in Maryland. And this became known as Project Stargate. And Project Stargate ran for years. It was finally shut down in 1995 after Nightline reported about it. But in those 23 years, CIA remote viewers were used in all kinds of operations, and they delivered results. Remote viewers drew renderings of secret Soviet bases. They located hostages of the Red Brigade in Italy and victims of the Israeli hostage crisis. They saw locations of Scud missiles during the first Gulf War, and a remote viewer even saw the eventual attack of the World Trade Center, though his warning was ignored. In 1989, a remote viewer named Angela Ford was asked to help track a former customs agent who was on the run, and she told researchers she was able to see him in Lowell, Wyoming.
Was he in Lowell?
Well, there's actually no such place as Lowell, Wyoming.
Oh.
But there is a Lovell, Wyoming, which is only one letter off.
And he was there?
He was there.
You're blowing my mind.
So researchers began to wonder, if we can use remote viewing to see places here on Earth, can we use remote viewing to visit other planets?
Can we?
Well, that brings us to the story of Joe McMoneagle, who, if you believe him, is the first person to ever visit Mars.
Yeah.
And the first person to ever travel back in time. Joe McMoneagle was a U.S. Army intelligence officer who served in Vietnam. In 1970, he was seriously injured in a helicopter accident and almost died. And when he recovered, he realized he had psychic powers and began working for Project Stargate as a psychic spy. Now, between 1978 and 1984, McMoneagle was involved in 450 separate CIA missions. Now, he helped locate hostages in Iran. He once discovered a shortwave radio hidden inside a KGB agent's calculator. But his strangest mission took place on May 22, 1984. Here's how it went. McMoneagle was in a room with one other person, a researcher. He was given a sealed envelope and instructed not to open it. He was then given a set of geographic coordinates and asked to describe what he saw.
All right, using the information in the envelope, please focus on 40.89 degrees north, 9.55 degrees west.
I want to say it looks like, I don't know, it sort of looks like pyramids. It's very high.
Okay.
I'm seeing, it's like a perception of a shadow of people. Very, very tall, thin. It's only shadow. It's as if they were there and they're not there anymore.
Go back to a period of time where they are there.
It's like I get a lot of static on the line and everything. It's breaking up all the time. It's very fragmentary pieces.
Just report the data. Don't try to put things together. Just report the raw data.
I just keep seeing very large people. They appear thin and tall, but they're very large. Wearing some kind of strange clothes.
He's then directed to explore other sets of coordinates, still with no other information. Now, McMoneagle describes seeing a large obelisk that reminds him of the Washington Monument. He sees what he describes as rounded bottom carved channels like roadbeds. He sees pyramids that appear to be storm shelters, and in the pyramids, more thin, shadowy people that seem to be hibernating. He claims these are an ancient people dying and past their time or age. After his visions fade, the envelope is torn open, and on it reads, "The planet Mars. Time of interest, approximately 1 million years BC.
Holy sh**.
Now look, some of these stories may sound crazy, but all the information we've presented today comes from a CIA document dump about Project Stargate and other psychic projects.
Yeah, but these document dumps are always a little light. How many pages are we talking? 25, 50?
12 million.
12 million? Whoa!
Yep. So you might not believe in psychics or ESP, and that's fine, but the United States government absolutely does. And it's easy to marginalize someone like Joseph McMoneagle and call him a kook, but he was and is a serious guy. He wasn't reading tarot cards at a county fair somewhere. When he retired from the Army, he was awarded the Legion of Merit for outstanding service. He's written books, given lectures, he's been interviewed countless times, and he believes he was part of a very important and effective research project. Now, of his hundreds of missions, they weren't all successful, but even being successful at remote viewing 1% of the time is extraordinary. But according to the CIA, McMoneagle was successful 20% of the time. It's not like anyone could just guess the location of a sunken Soviet Typhoon-class submarine, but Joe McMoneagle was able to do it.
If this was so effective, why did the government shut it down?
Once the government starts a program, does it ever really go away?
Nope.
Project Stargate was shut down in the 90s, but that was by no means the end of government research into ESP. In 2014, the Office of Naval Research launched a 4-year, $4 million program to explore the use of premonition or sixth sense among sailors and Marines. And there are others. Dr. Edwin May, the former head of the Stargate Project, continues to say ESP is a legitimate tool for military intelligence. In the scientific community, the military, intelligence organizations, and in the highest levels of government, there are plenty of people who support research into the paranormal. Now, personally, I consider myself a skeptical believer, or an open-minded skeptic. But I think this is still a subject worthy of study. I mean, open any congressional spending bill and look at the junk in there. We spent $27 million to teach people in Morocco how to create pottery, $3 million to encourage Chinese prostitutes to drink responsibly.
Oh, I hear a few congressmen supported that one.
$600,000 to study why chimps throw their feces.
I wish I could do that.
I'm glad you can't. So, yeah, if we can spend $1 million studying the effect of cocaine on the sexual habits of quail, we can spend a few bucks on ESP. And look at it this way. As long as there's a CIA, and as long as there's a United States Congress, this channel will have plenty of material.
Are there any studies about the effect of vodka on goldfish sex?
I don't think so.
Well, let's start researching, baby!
+15 That video was really my first exposure to Project Stargate. I had heard of it, but before I started researching it, I didn't realize how extensive it was. But it was one of the most recommended topics on the channel, so I had to cover it.
Wait, what episode number was that?
36.
Nobody was watching the channel then.
That's true. At this point, there was maybe, 1,000 people watching the channel. Maybe the video got 2,000 views.
So when you say highly suggested, how many people asked for that one?
2.
Uh-huh.
But I became fascinated with Project Stargate and with people like Ingo Swann, Pat Price.
My favorite is that Irish guy, Joe McMuffin.
Joseph McMoneagle. He's remote viewed for every intelligence agency in the U.S. and has a very high success rate over thousands of remote viewing sessions.
He's the one that saw alien bases in Mount Hayes.
Yes, he did.
Mount motherfucking Hayes.
Okay, next up is a story of Paul Amadeus Denock. Paul goes into a coma and spends 2 years in the future and writes down everything that he saw. Now, this was episode 41, and this was the first time I started experimenting with storytelling, like first-person fiction, as opposed to being like a YouTube personality. And I felt like it was kind of risky to do, but it was fun, and I think people seem to like it. Separates us from other channels.
You still flabby in this one, Chunk?
Yes.
Sloth, love, Chunk.
In 1924, Paul Amadeus Denock had been teaching the German language in Greece. Dying of tuberculosis, he wanted to return home to Switzerland. Before he left, he gave hundreds of pages of handwritten notes to his favorite language student, Georgios Papahatsis. Denock thought translating his notes would help Papahatsis in his study of the German language. They said goodbye, never saw each other again. Papahatsis began translating the pages. There were whole passages about a coming nuclear war, colonizing Mars, and a global government. Sections about flying vehicles, holographic technology, and contact with alien life. Papahatsis thought it was a science fiction novel. But as more and more of the text was revealed, Papahatsis was shocked at what he discovered. This wasn't a novel at all. This was actually Denock's personal diary. Denock wrote about how he went into a coma and woke up 2,000 years in the future.
It seems that Paul Amadeus Dinac had experienced some kind of time slip that caused him to fall asleep in the year 1921 and wake up in the year 3906. He spent a whole year in the future, and he wrote down everything he saw. This is his story. It's May 1921. Paul Dinac is teaching his college language class when he starts to feel dizzy. He has a history of illness and eventually ends up hospitalized. He develops a terrible fever, and for the next few hours, he's in and out of consciousness. He perceives different men and women gathering around him, but he's too weak to communicate. When he finally wakes up, his hospital room is different. People are dressed in unfamiliar clothing, and they're speaking a strange language. Being a language teacher, he recognizes a few words from English and Swedish. Now, Dinac tries to communicate, but nobody can understand him. One of the doctors recognizes his language. The doctor tries his best to communicate in broken German. He tells Dinac his name is actually Andreas Northam, a famous physics professor who had an accident. Now, Dinac says he has no idea who Andreas Northam is, but he's shown a mirror, and he sees a stranger's face looking back at him. Now, Dinac becomes visibly upset and starts sobbing. He thinks he's dead, or worse, gone crazy. He cries that he's just a simple language teacher from Switzerland and has no idea what's happening to him. The doctors seem to react to the word Switzerland, and someone asks him what year it is. Dinac says it's 1922. A hush falls over the room. After a few seconds, the older physician steps forward and tells Dinac that the year is actually 3906. Now, Dinac doesn't believe it. The blinds on his windows are opened, and he sees buildings reaching through the clouds. Vehicles that seem to defy gravity buzz quickly past his window. Suddenly overwhelmed, he blacks out. Dinac is watched carefully for 3 days, but he eventually recovers enough to walk. And he describes walls made of crystal that give you a panoramic view of the landscape. Objects are made of pastel-colored glowing metal that's warm to the touch. And he's led through a corridor to a large room. Here he meets two older men in white robes. And at first, Dinac thinks they're actually priests or kings, but they're actually called electors, with an I. These are like elder wise men. Now, up until this time, Dinac's doctors didn't believe he was from the past. They thought he was suffering from some kind of brain trauma. But after questioning him for a while, the electors do believe him. They have knowledge of a rare psychic phenomenon that they called a consciousness shift, where someone's mind or soul could be transported into somebody else's body. And they think that's what happened to Dinac. When Andreas Northam, whose body was being occupied by Dinac, was injured in an accident, he was clinically dead for 15 minutes. Doctors dropped the temperature of his brain and they were able to restart his heart. It was at that point the electors believed that this personality shift occurred, and the mind of Paul Dinac was transferred into the body of Andreas Northam 2,000 years in the future.
How does your consciousness get beamed into the future?
Well, Dinac wonders about this too, and he asked the electors about it, and they say that time isn't linear, that everyone's consciousness exists all the time, everywhere. Even though this is a rare event, it is something that's known to happen. It's at this point that a man named Stefan is summoned. Now, Stefan had been a close friend of Andreas Northam, and the electors decide that only Stefan and his doctors would know his true identity. To everyone else, Paul Dinac would be Andreas Northam, and Dinac would assume his life. Now, the electors believe that if Stefan could help Andreas Northam regain his memories, that the personality shift could be reversed, and Dinac would be sent back to his own time. So, Stefan agrees to visit Dinac every day to teach him about modern society. But Dinac is mostly interested about what happened in the past. Even though the doctors in 3960 understood the psychic personality shift, there was one thing that puzzled them. Back in the 1920s, Dinac was suffering from something called encephalitis lethargica, sometimes called sleeping sickness. And people with this disease have difficulty speaking, moving, staying awake. In the 1920s, there was actually an epidemic of encephalitis lethargica that affected over 1 million people around the world. But even though Dinac had been living in the future for a full 2 weeks, he never slept. He would stay awake throughout the night reading books, learning the new language, but he never felt tired and never actually fell asleep. He spent a lot of time using a new piece of technology called a Regenschwager. Now, up until now, the most modern learning device Dinac ever encountered was a book. But he describes the Regenschwager as a handheld device with moving three-dimensional images that glow in the dark, with sound, music, and narration.
Like an iPad?
Kinda, yeah. And Enoch's doctors encouraged him to learn anything he wanted about the past, but they did not let him study the 20th century. They didn't want him to have knowledge about any historical event that he might be able to change.
So what did he learn?
Well, the years 2000 through 2300 are the most difficult for the human race. Overpopulation and regional conflict are the biggest problems we face. In 2204, we finally colonized Mars. Over 60 years, the population on Mars grows to 20 million people. But in 2265, there was some kind of planet-wide catastrophe, like a large impact event, that wiped out the entire colony, and we never tried again. In 2309, there was a medium-scale nuclear war that devastated most of Europe. Only the Baltic and Scandinavian countries survived, which is presumably why their language is an English-Scandinavian hybrid. Now, this war would be global and last for 80 years, and most of the human population would be wiped out. In 2396, a New World government called a Rechtsstaat was established, and this ends the ancient period of history and marks the beginning of modern history.
Oh no.
What?
One world government?
Yep. When the Rechtsstaat was formed in 2396, it was a one-world government designed to end the global war. And it was a government like we'd recognize today.
Corrupt?
Pretty much. It was run by the wealthy and powerful, and countries around the world still had strong local nationalism, so they resisted the new government for about 200 years. Eventually, citizens stopped electing politicians and businessmen. Instead, the higher offices were held by scientists, philosophers, and humanitarians.
Huh.
What?
That actually makes sense.
It does. And over the next 300 years, society starts to reform. In 2823, a world leader named Torhild proposed a new economic system. And this system is not based on global scarcity like our system. Instead, the system is based on global adequacy. It is at this point that people start working for the greater good. Initially, they work for 40 years of their life in their chosen field, and after that, they retire. All of their material needs are met by the global community. Now, as time goes on, technology and automation progresses so much that when Paul Enoch arrives, people work only 2 years of their life. They're educated through their childhood, and at age 17, they enter the workforce. They work very hard for about 2 years, and then they retire, able to pursue any type of life they want.
They work for 2 years? That's it?
That's it. Because in 3906, all material needs are met. Food, shelter, clothing, education, even entertainment. And money as we know it isn't used anymore. Instead, value is placed in art and science. You could absolutely pursue a career if you wanted, like Andreas Northam was a physicist, but you didn't have to work. If you wanted to live a life of leisure, as long as you completed your 2 years of service, you could do that.
Sounds to me like some hippie Star Trek socialite paradise bull.
Now, I admit, it does kind of sound like that.
You know, socialism and communism never work, right?
I know that, which is an interesting twist to the story. Let me ask you, why doesn't socialism work?
Because no matter how good most people are, there's always selfish jerks who want more.
That's right. Human nature gets in the way. But by the year 3906, we're not human anymore.
Wait, what?
At least, we're not human as we think of it. We evolve into something else. Paul Enoch talks of a phenomenon that starts to happen to people around the year 3000. It's called the Needlework.
Needlework?
Needlework.
What'd I say?
In the future, the human brain structure evolves and a new sense organ is developed. This gives people the ability to perceive a new plane of existence and access to vast spiritual knowledge. They called this ability oversensance or supervision, and it gave people a new cognitive ability, instant enlightenment.
Sounds pretty good.
Well, you would think. This new sense gave people feelings of incredible happiness and spiritual peace, and it's described as divine joy, acceptance of death, a disregard for all worldly things. And this feeling came all rushing at once.
People freaked out, didn't they?
They did. And everyone who experienced the Needlework died. They died with looks of ecstasy on their faces, but they were so overwhelmed that they couldn't survive the event until 3382. On September 6th of that year, a 76-year-old man named Alexis Volke was hit with the Needlework.
Needlework?
Needlework.
What'd I say?
But he survived. And from then on, everyone survived the Needlework. Eventually, the switching on of this new perception was a common process in everyone's life. Homo sapiens then gave way to a new species of human, Homo occidentalis novus, or New Western Man. So in the future, human nature itself changes. Present humans are hardwired for survival, competition, and success. even at the expense of others. So this utopian vision of the future just wouldn't work today. But what if you can change the actual wiring of the human brain itself? In 3906, there were hardly any laws. They weren't needed anymore. People actually worked for the common good because that's how they're evolved. Selfishness is a concept that is studied as an archaic remnant of a less evolved species. People in 3906 can't even imagine themselves acting like we do today. Now, Paul Dinock finds the future people very strange. He says they act like carefree children. But you have to admit that there's a part of you, maybe even a large part, that would like to go back to some moment in your childhood where all your needs were met, where you had no fear, no envy, no anxiety. As Dinock's friend Stefan says, all these things that you view as strange, who is to say that they are childish instead of divine? Interesting point. But Dinock wonders, how would these people survive an outside threat, like contact with aliens? Well, Stefan says they've already been contacted many times, and it turned out fine. Now, humans in the future are aware of intelligent beings living in the solar system and around the galaxy, but they aren't interested in communication with us. Instead, they prefer to study us from a distance. But Stefan does admit they have intervened with the human race on a few occasions, like when our species was close to self-imposed extinction. And Dinock learns that these extraterrestrial beings experience their own kind of enlightenment.
Needlework.
What
I say.
So aliens leave us alone to walk our own path. When Paul Dinock was a young man, he fell in love with a girl from his village named Anna. Though Anna felt the same, her family wanted her to marry someone else. Now, during one of their last moments together, they were sitting on a hill surrounded by blossoming windflowers, which are white buttercups. Now, Paul wanted this day to last forever because he knew he was losing her. So finally she said, "Enough for today, let's go back." And Paul said, "Promise me that I will see you again." And she said she promised, and the next time we're here, I'll make a wreath of windflowers for you to place upon my head. Now, Paul never did see her again, and this was something that tormented him his entire life. He would constantly pray for signs of Anna's eternal love for him, but those signs never came.
Okay, cute story, but where are we going with this? Let's get back to the crazy stuff.
Well, having spent a year with the people in 3906, Dinock developed a relationship with a woman named Sylvia. They decided to go for a day trip. They traveled in what Dinock called a Vigiosa, which was a flying vehicle that could take you anywhere on Earth almost instantly. He decided he wanted to visit his old village, though Sylvia didn't know that's where they were going. So they spent the day talking and exploring, eventually ending up on that same hill where Paul and Anna were all those years ago. Now, windflowers were also blossoming that day, and while they sat and talked, Sylvia made a wreath of windflowers. She then looked at Paul Dinock and said, "Enough for today, let's go back." She hands him the wreath and asks him to place it upon her head.
Reincarnation?
Yes. Dinock feels like he's hit by lightning. He sees this as the sign he's been praying for his entire life. Later, he reflects on the day with Stefan, who reminds him that time isn't linear. Stefan believes Sylvia is the reincarnated soul of Anna, who 2,000 years later fulfills her promise. That night, Paul Dinock feels his eyes getting heavy, and he wonders if he'll finally be able to sleep at night from now on. And his last thought is how much he missed this feeling. Finally, Andreas Northam falls asleep for the first time in a year, and back in 1922, Paul Dinock awakens from a year-long coma. The story of Paul Amadeus Dinock is such a good one. But what really happened to him? Was his story real? Was it a hoax, a money grab? Well, there are a couple options. The first is that he was telling the truth, that he really had a paranormal experience that sent him 2,000 years into the future. And if you read the entire book, it seems plausible. It's over 300 pages and it's full of details. There are hundreds of names, places, dates. Dinock talks about future technology like cryonics, the internet, flying vehicles, teleporters, and even something that sounds like a holodeck. I can't come close to covering everything here, but I'll link to the book if you want to check it out. If you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber, no sponsor, it's actually free to read. The second option is that while in his coma, Paul Dinock experienced what he thought was reality, but was nothing more than vivid dreams.
You could dream in a coma?
Well, it depends on the illness and injury of the brain, but people definitely can and do. And if he was dreaming for a year, that's plenty of time to create a richly detailed vision of the future world. But there's one more theory we have to consider, and it's the theory that I believe. It's that Paul Amadeus Dinock never existed. Even though the story of Paul Dinock is not that well known, it's been covered in a few blogs and podcasts and videos, and in all of them, the same photo of Paul is used. It's the photo I used in the thumbnail. It's this one here. But what's never mentioned is that this is actually the mugshot of Daniel Tohill, who was arrested for theft in New Zealand in 1908. Also, Paul Dinock lived in Zurich in the 1920s. That's not that long ago. The city has records of every citizen living in the city at that time, as does the city of Athens, where Dinock was supposed to be teaching. But there are no records of anyone by this name, not even close. Now, Georgios Papahatsis, the translator and publisher of the story, says he tried to find Dinock years later, but couldn't. He attributed this to the fact that Dinock fought for Germany during World War I and actually changed his name before moving to neutral Switzerland, so we don't know what his real name is.
That's convenient.
Well, what's even more convenient is that the original handwritten diary is gone. Papahatsis said that while living in Greece during the war, his house was searched by the Greek military, and because the notes were in German, the soldiers seized them and never gave them back.
Yeah, sounds fishy.
It does. And others have noted the similarity of this story to a story written by H.P. Lovecraft called The Shadow Out of Time. Lovecraft's story is written in the first person like a diary, and the protagonist goes into a coma and wakes up at a different time.
Plagiarism.
Well, Dinock woke up in the future, and Lovecraft's hero wakes up in the past. Still, there are similarities. And The Shadow Out of Time was published in 1936. So if the story was inspired by Lovecraft, then there's no way it was written by Dinock in the 1920s.
So this Greek dude wrote a hoax?
I don't think so. Georgios Papahatsis was a highly respected law professor and intellectual. He even served as a jurist on Greece's Council of State. That was like their Supreme Court. So this was a serious guy. He was very interested in administrative law, social studies, and humanities. And these are the themes we see in Paul Dinock's diary. It's likely that the book was written as an intellectual exercise and exploration of human spirituality. And Papahatsis added the sci-fi twist and the love story as literary devices. Now, he probably didn't mean for anyone to take it seriously as something that actually happened, but there's no way to know for sure. I mean, this is the age of the internet. And if you write a story about a time-traveling coma patient, people are going to believe it. I certainly wanted to.
3 + 1 5 + 0 0.
Still a good episode, and I'd love to go back and expand that one to be 40-45 minutes. Now, speaking of longer episodes, next up is the Dodleston Messages. And this episode was 27, was it that long? Yeah, it's 27 minutes long. It's one where it's a fun story where they're using an old computer to communicate with people in the past and the future that lived in the same house. I don't want to spoil it, but it's a fun episode. But it went against all of my YouTube training, which said keep videos 12, 15 minutes at the most. Don't go beyond that because people just won't watch.
You really rolled the dice with this one, Chunk.
Stop calling me that. But yeah, I did. Now episodes run 30, 40 minutes, some almost an hour.
Too much.
Yeah, I think so too, but people seem to like the longer episodes. I'd rather keep them 20, 25 minutes and maybe do one deep dive a month.
Yeah, good luck. You're gonna hear it.
I know. I hear it during the live premieres. If anything's less than 30 minutes long, they complain it's too short.
Too fat?
Too short.
You're that too. I can do this all day.
In December 1984, Ken Webster, a high school teacher, was living with his friend Nick and girlfriend Debbie in the small village of Dodleston. One evening, the three were walking home from the local pub when they saw a pulsing green light emanating from their cottage windows. When they got inside, they saw something that terrified them. Though their computer wasn't connected to any network and everyone in the house was gone all night, a strange message was written on the screen, a message addressed to them by name. Over the next few months, more messages appeared, and eventually Ken and his friends began corresponding with the person on the other side. At first, Ken thinks this is a hoax or a prank, but over time, he comes to believe that not only are the messages real, they're being written by someone living in the very same house in the year 1541. Let's find out why. As written in Ken Webster's book, The Vertical Plane, strange things started happening as soon as they moved into Meadow Cottage at Dodleston near the border of England and Wales. One day, Ken noticed that small, six-toed footprints seemed to walk directly up the wall and through the ceiling. It's a very old house, so he thought they were just little stains, so he painted over them. But the next day, the footprints were back, on top of new paint. After that, Ken, Nick, and Debbie would routinely see bottles, cans, and boxes stacked in towers, sometimes over 4 feet tall. They assumed that friends in the village were playing pranks, but nobody came forward. 2 months after the first message appeared, Ken, Debbie, and Nick returned home from a day trip and found a new file had been saved on the BBC computer. The file name was REATE. They opened it.
What strange words thou speak, although I must confess that I hath also been ill-schooled. Thou art goodly man who hath fanciful woman who dwell in mine home. 'Tis a fitting place, with lights which devil maketh, and costly things, that only mine friend Edmund Gray can afford, or the king himself.
Now, this was not the way people spoke in the 80s, but there was more.
'Twas a great crime to hath bribed mine house. L.W.
Ken printed the message and brought it to school, where most people thought it was entertaining and nonsense, but not Peter Trinder. Trinder was a literature teacher who was convinced it was written in Old English. They interpreted the phrase devil lights to mean the computer, and Peter Trinder asked Ken to let him know if any more messages appeared so he can try and determine the location and the time period of the dialect. A few days went by with nothing, but then Ken had an idea. He wondered if, since he was able to receive messages, could he also send them? So he sat down on the computer and began to type. Now, at this point in the story, Ken is still not convinced that this isn't a hoax, but he admits that he's intrigued, so he plays along. He sits at the computer and types question after question, trying to get information about who this is that could be sending messages from wherever they're coming from.
Dear LW, thank you for your message. We're sorry for disturbing you. What would you like us to do? Did you live on a house on this land about 1620? Do you want us to tell you more about our time? Who is Edmund Gray? Do you have a family? Is the king James or Charles? What is the charge house? Was this village called Doddleston in your life? Thank you very much for your messages. Thank you for not making us afraid. Ken, Debbie, and John.
They save the messages to disk, then leave the computer on and head out to the Red Lion pub. And the hope is that if they leave the computer alone for a while, that it would prompt a reply. And that's exactly what happened. When they returned home a few hours later, a new message was waiting for them.
'Twas an honest farm of oak and stone. It is helpful that you should tell me about thy time. Dost thou have horse? Edmund Gray, brother of John Gray, lives at Kinnerton Hall. Thy king, of course, is Henry VIII, who is 46. I know what of King James. Mine charge house is a place of law, schooling. L.W. The 28th of March, anno 1521.
This was a troubling reply in more ways than one. First, the facts about the history of this time were wrong. In 1521, Henry VIII was only 30 years old, not 46. But to be sure, Ken delivered the message to Peter Trinder for analysis, and Trinder confirmed that the historical facts were all wrong. Kinnerton Hall wouldn't be built for another 200 years, and there's no mention of Edmund or John Gray in any record or document. And Ken was troubled by the use of modern grammar and punctuation, like question marks, which wouldn't have been used in the 16th century. So that left the other possibility, that there was an intruder in the house, and this had Ken, Debbie, and Nick concerned. But that weekend, Ken borrowed the BBC computer once again to see if more messages would come.
Did they get more messages?
They did. They received a whole bunch of details about the house, the village, the time, and most importantly, instead of being signed by the mysterious LW, they were signed with the author's full name. In the next message, the author gave all kinds of details about his life. He talked about losing his wife and son to the plague. He talks about how he harvests barley for ale and makes his own cheese. He describes the house as humble, made of red stone, and sitting on a pretty parcel of land. Now, Meadow Cottage, where Ken, Nick, and Debbie were living, was not made of red stone, but they were doing renovations. When they dug up some of the land in the garden and looked under the kitchen, they discovered the foundation of another structure, much, much older than theirs.
Tell me they found red stone.
And the foundation was indeed made of red sandstone. Now, these latest messages also had a different tone. The author seemed to think that Ken was intruding on his house and had his own concerns about this conversation. He finally signed the message Lucas, and eventually we learned that LW's full name is Lucas Wainman. Ken now had a lot of details that could be checked for accuracy, so he delivered them to Peter Trinder to see what he can find. And Trinder felt that the dialect, sentence structure, and intermittent use of Latin placed the messages in the middle of the 16th century, in the Cheshire area, which is exactly where Lucas Wayman said he was living. Also, as time went on, the historical facts became more consistent and accurate, and Lucas writes that King Henry VIII is married to Catherine Parr, so that put him in the 1540s, which is pretty consistent with a lot of the other details. But the names Lucas mentioned, like Richard Wishel and others, couldn't be found.
So this is a hoax?
Well, not necessarily. If it was a hoax, you'd think that the messages would be full of names and facts that could be easily checked. But Lucas was a simple rural farmer. He'd really only have knowledge of the king and people in his village. A tiny hamlet like Dodleston wouldn't keep detailed records of every individual living there. Now, Lucas doesn't know where Ken is, but eventually Ken reveals that he's actually writing from the year 1985, and that's where the story takes a turn.
You said your time be 1985. We thought you were also from 2109, like your friend.
What the? 2109? What friend?
It would appear that whatever phenomenon that Ken Webster encountered that allowed communication to the past was also a conduit for communication to the future. As more text came in and as more of the information was researched by Peter Trinder, Ken was believing less that this was a hoax. The responses were coming too fast for someone to be breaking in and leaving files on his computer. And Ken and Debbie was starting to believe that they were somehow communicating with a real man. A man who lived 400 years ago on the same piece of land where Ken was living now. But who were the people from 2109? Lucas didn't seem to know. Lucas thought they were friends of Ken's. So Ken did the obvious thing. He asked.
Calling 2109.
And then came a response.
Ken, Deb, Peter, we are sorry that we can give you only two choices. One, that you either have your predicament explained in such a way that you have instant understanding, but cause what should not happen. Or two, try to understand that you three have a purpose that shall, in your lifetime, changes the face of history. We, 2109, must not affect your thoughts directly, but give you some sort of guidance that will allow room for your own destiny. All we can say is that we are all part of the same God, whatever he or whatever it is.
Apparently, Ken's computer had opened two-way communication not only with the past, but with the future as well. And according to 2109, this communication had purpose, though we don't yet know what that purpose is. Meanwhile, Meadow Cottage was experiencing more and more events that seemed to be a poltergeist. Footsteps were heard at all hours of the night, but when they were investigated, nothing was there except footprints. Sections of the house would become so cold that breath was visible. More objects were found stacked in corners of rooms. Tapping was heard. Even words were found written in chalk around the house, including Lucas's name. The anxiety was becoming too much. Deb had rented another house nearby so they could occasionally get some sleep, and Nick, who'd been with them since the beginning, had moved out. Deb tried to find some explanation for what was happening and pulled some maps of the area. She learned that a ley line was running...
Wait. What's a ley line?
Well, a ley line is an alignment drawn between two structures that supposedly possess or can harness energy. Stonehenge, the Great Pyramids, Chichen Itza, and other significant structures are built on ley lines.
Was your cottage built on a ley line?
It was. And after discovering this, Deb started having visions and vivid dreams about Lucas, even interacting with him like he was trying to communicate further. It's at this point that Ken and Deb bring in help, the Society of Psychical Research.
They called in the heavies?
They did, and the SPR sent two researchers to Meadow Cottage, and the plan was either to debunk or prove the phenomenon once and for all. The Society for Psychical Research, or SPR, had been investigating the paranormal since 1882, and they're still around today.
OG ghost hunters.
They are. And two investigators, David Welch and John Bucknell from the SPR, arrived and proposed a test. They would send 10 questions to 2109 and then delete them. But Ken and Deb would have no idea what the questions were. Ken and Deb were then separated from the computer while they waited for a reply. And a few days later...
David, John. David, you interfere with communication. Next time you decide to perform your little experiment, you must be clear from here. We suggest you try someone else to sit with Debbie. Yes, we are what you would call a tachyon universe, but your understanding is incorrect. We ask nothing more of you than to carry on as you would prefer. We will have John present if given choice, or you may bring another as mentioned. No, it is no concern to us that this is not proved. We will give you a plotting of a star next time. We move at a speed so that we cover every point in your time and universe. We have no form. We feed of a heat energy that you will not have heard of. 2109.
David Welch said that 2109 didn't answer the questions, but had picked up on all the questions in the right order. And Ken and Deb thought this would prove that they were not perpetrating a hoax. The SPR investigators weren't so sure. They speculated that maybe sensitive microphones could have been planted to let them know the questions in advance.
They spoke the questions out loud?
No, they didn't, but the investigators thought that maybe a microphone could pick up the sounds of the keys being pressed, and that Ken would be able to deduce what they were typing.
Yeah, that sounds like a stretch to me.
It does, but for something like this, it's best to eliminate every possibility. The SPR investigators left, and Ken looked for more ways to convince them that what was happening was real. Frank Davis, another teacher at Ken's school, agreed to come over as a witness. When he arrived at the study where the computer was set up, he reported that the room became extremely cold for 2 or 3 minutes before returning to normal. They all went into the kitchen for a while to talk, and when they came back to check the computer, a new message had arrived. But this time, it was from someone else. When Ken, Debbie, and Frank Davis checked the computer that evening, a new message was shown on the screen. And it wasn't from Lucas. It was from someone who called himself John, who was a friend of Lucas's. John said that the local sheriff had Lucas imprisoned for witchcraft and communicating with spirits. So for days, no new messages arrived, and Ken and Debbie attributed this to Lucas rotting in a prison cell somewhere. Meanwhile, Peter Trinder was still feverishly trying to decipher the past messages, and Trinder enlisted the help of a librarian at Brasenose College at Oxford. Now, Lucas claimed to have attended Brasenose and gave Ken a list of books to check to prove he was telling the truth. Now, after some time, the librarian confirmed that not only did every single book exist at the college, but they were all contemporary to the 1520s, exactly as Lucas described. Finally, Ken and Deb decided to take an aggressive approach. They demanded that word be taken to the sheriff that Lucas be freed, or they would use their power against him. That seemed to get the sheriff's attention, and Lucas was immediately freed. Now, sensing a new kinship, Ken asked Lucas if he was the one moving objects around the house. Lucas says it wasn't him, but the same thing was happening on his side. Both Ken and Lucas began to suspect that the poltergeist activity was being caused by the mysterious entity that they called 2109. So Lucas asked Ken to move the BBC computer to the kitchen, which on Lucas's side would let him communicate more privately. Now, 2109 had warned Ken and Lucas to not give each other details about their lives, but they were growing distrustful. Lucas then proposed an idea that sounded completely bizarre. He asked that a paper and pen be set next to the computer. Now, Ken didn't understand this, but he did as he was instructed. The next morning, next to the computer was a handwritten note. The writing was elegant and archaic, and the note was signed Thomas. Early in their communications, Lucas, whose real name was Thomas, was reluctant to give his real name. He said that this was out of fear of being accused of witchcraft, which actually came to pass. But Thomas left clues about his full name in his letter. He said, "You have my name in your book. It is also the name of Peter's house." Peter lived close by in a town called Harweden, which was also the location of the school where Ken and Peter taught. Using this information, Ken and Peter were able to track down a man named Thomas Harweden, who was a fellow at Brasenose College at Oxford in the 1530s. This was their guy. And Ken, Debbie, and Peter were getting very close to the truth and learning everything they could about Thomas Harweden. But the entity known as 2109 seemed to be upset by this. A few days later, the computer was moved into the bathroom on its own, and then Ken found a message scribbled in chalk on the floor.
One more chance. Measure frequency by +2 energy. What else other than sound and light?
This 2109 is freaking me out.
I know.
Ken, Deb, Peter, we have reason to believe you have Lucas Wainman's true name. If this is correct, you must say so we can rectify the problem immediately before it is accepted.
She's touchy.
Yeah, and Ken wanted to minimize his contact with 2109. After more communication with Thomas Harweden in the 16th century, Ken learned that 2109 was tampering with many of the earlier messages that Thomas, aka Lucas, had sent. Apparently, 2109 was trying to obscure details to prevent Ken from discovering Thomas's true identity, which is why some facts were wrong. Meanwhile, the Society for Psychical Research had lost interest in the case. They told a local paper,
"Clearly, if this case is a hoax, then the two teachers are the prime suspects. I believe it is also possible that a third party was responsible. I would have loved to prove it was genuine. It would have been the most unique phenomenon ever recorded. Something or someone is doing it. It was not the job of the SPR to point the finger."
As Ken suspected, the SPR was extremely skeptical and wasn't taking the investigation seriously. So Ken contacted the SPR to obtain the records of the case. Strangely, the SPR said there is no record of such a case. Investigator John Bucknell had disappeared and nobody could reach him. And there was no record of anyone named David Welch affiliated with the SPR. As far as the SPR is concerned, none of this ever happened, and everyone connected to the case was gone. Apparently, 2109 was aware of Ken's frustration because a few days later, they contacted him. And this time, they gave him the name of someone to contact.
No?
And a phone number. When Ken sat down at the BBC computer, 2109 had left him a very specific message.
"We ask you to do the following. There is a brilliant researcher, ufologist. We know you don't like the word. His name is Gary M. Rowe. His ideas differ somewhat to yours, but nevertheless, he can help you with a couple of your problems. You may phone him at the number below and invite him to talk with you. When he comes, show him this and ask him what he makes of it. Peter must do the telephoning. Tell him that you got his telephone number from a UFO enthusiast. 2109.
Gary Lowe was a UFO investigator who was skeptical, but he did come out to Meadow Cottage with all kinds of equipment to try and figure out what was going on. And this began a series of communication between Gary and 2109 directly. The process was this. Gary would put a letter in a sealed envelope and place it on top of the computer. When 2109 would respond, the message was printed and put into an envelope without Ken reading it. And this back and forth continued for some time when Gary finally sent a message back to 2109 that read,
"Greetings. I am instructed to apologize, but in any event, I would have done so of my volition. There will be a letter hopefully this weekend. I am also instructed to apologize to Ken and Debbie. I must try and answer your last letter. It would appear that you are more important than I had realized in the scheme of things. Gary."
Apparently, something in one of the messages from 2109 had caused Gary to become very secretive about the communication and the contents of the letters. Ken became so frustrated and angry that Gary left that night. And they would never hear from Gary again. As Ken continued to communicate with Thomas, aka Lucas, Lucas explained that one night he saw glowing lights coming from his fireplace. From the light, a man stepped out and asked him to not be afraid. When the man left, Lucas found what he described as a light box in his kitchen. He realized that when he spoke to the light box, his words would appear on a screen in glowing green letters. And on March 21st, 1985, Lucas had sent his final message.
"My true fellows and sweet maid, Grona has said that Thomas must go. I know it is for the best because the people of Dodleston are very wary of me. It is good to know that all will change and there are true men to follow like Ken and Peter. Though 400 years is a long time, and there is much to happen to mankind. Perhaps you will come to Oxford. Now I think there is no danger for me there, for I hear the king is very sick and all is quiet in the church. I shall go by boat from Cheshire to Bristol. I shall try to make my stay at Brasenose. I will write my book about my brothers and maid and the end of Lucas and our love for one another. One day you will all sit down at my table for wine and mead by the river in Oxford, where we shall read each other's books and laugh, and we shall speak of truth and good men, watching Oxford change together forevermore. In your time, my book is old, but I shall not go to my God until it is written. Then we will all be truly embraced. My love to you all. I shall await you in Oxford. Thomas Harden."
Well, that was touching.
I thought so.
Did he ever write the book?
Well, we have one final message from 2109.
"There is another person to come. They will be the help we need. You will know when they come. Thomas did eventually write his book, and he soon died shortly after. He placed it in a secure place. It shouldn't take too many years to find it. though he wrote it in Latin with the help of a friend that he met in Oxford. The inscription reads,
"Me writes this with the hope that mine friends will one day find this book. Then may our lands be not so distant."
"We will finish now. You have a lot of work to do. There is no need to write back as we will have gone. Thank you for your cooperation. 2109.
And no more communication would follow. In all, Lucas in 2109 had sent over 300 messages to Ken and Debbie. And a few years later, Ken would document the story in his book, The Vertical Plane. The story would again be covered in 1996 in a BBC documentary called From Out of This World. And Ken and Debbie appeared on the program, but with their backs to the camera. They claimed that the messages were real, and they held important information about our past and future. You can find Debbie online posting as recently as a few weeks before I recorded this, and she sounds reasonable, rational, and convinced. And while their story has many skeptics, Ken and Debbie insist that one day their story will be revealed to be the truth. I hope they're right. Wow, this is a good story. So how much of it is real? All of it? None of it? All of it?
All of it.
Well, here's what I've been able to dig up. Peter Trinder essentially worked as a translator of the messages. And the original script was so foreign-sounding that he had to dig through years of the Oxford English Dictionary to decipher meanings of lots of the words. And Trinder said that this would be almost impossible to fake, especially for someone with no background in medieval languages. And Peter Trinder even went on camera with the BBC to say so.
It was very real. That's all I'm saying, Richard. It was very close. The kind of thing that you could not doubt. But all the time one was aware of the possibility of hoax. But if it was a hoax, by golly, it was brilliant.
Now, on the skeptical side, also from the same program, there's Dr. Laura Wright of Cambridge.
Looking at the verb structure, there are things which Lucas says that would not have been said in 1546. It's true that individuals can make up individual words, but we don't make up our verbs. It's possible, or it was possible in England in 1546 to say, I do, thou dost, he, she, or it doth, he, she, or it does. But it wasn't possible to say, I doth, or he, she, or it dost. Now, all the way through Lucas's messages, he mixes and messes up these suffixes with the wrong subject.
Finally, when asked if she thought it was a hoax by someone with a background in early English writing...
No, if somebody had a background in early modern English writings, their hoax would look a lot better than this. I mean, they would get their verbal inflections correct. They wouldn't choose vocabulary that came from a period long before the period that this is supposed to have been written in. They'd do it a lot better.
Also, a sample of Ken's writing was run through software and compared against Lucas's messages. The result was that both sets of writing tested close enough with the software that they were possibly composed by the same author. Now, Ken said that 300 words isn't nearly large enough of a sample, and that the BBC specifically chose passages that they were sure would give them the results they hoped for.
Media always has an agenda.
That's true. Now, Ken and Debbie's roommate showed up in a forum a few years ago saying that Meadow Cottage was actually a peaceful place, and that he never experienced any of the phenomena that Ken did.
So Ken's lying?
Well, John doesn't go that far. He said Ken was a serious person and wouldn't want to open himself up to ridicule by writing a book that would make him out to be a loon. Another rumor, which I read online, I don't know if it's true, is that when the librarian was researching the books on Lucas's list, it's been reported that someone else was there also researching the same books. That's just what I read on a blog post. I'm not judging, I'm just reporting. And here's something interesting. In the book, which was published in 1989, Entity 2109 says that in Ken's lifetime, Fermat's last theorem would be solved. Pierre de Fermat proposed a mathematical theorem in 1637, and it was studied by mathematicians for over 350 years and couldn't be solved. Well, in 1995, Andrew Wiles published the first successful proof of Fermat's last theorem, a proof that earned Wiles the Abel Prize.
2109 was right.
They were. And that's an obscure detail for a hoaxer to just come up with, and it's a hell of a gamble. Also, 2109 gave the coordinates of an undiscovered star that they said would be important to mankind. And years later, a quasar was found at those coordinates. And Lucas talks about being imprisoned by a Sheriff Thomas Falhurst of Cheshire. Now, there's no record of this man, but I did some sleuthing, and it turns out that there absolutely was a Sir Thomas Falhurst with a slightly different spelling but same pronunciation, who was Sheriff of Cheshire in 1529, which is awfully close to the right time.
Did you ever find that UFO guy?
Ah, Gary Rowe.
Yeah, that guy.
Though UFO researcher Gary Rowe disappeared for years, he's since spoken out about the Dodelston messages. In the description, I'll link to a blog post from as recently as 2017 where Gary has all kinds of things to say. He believes every word of it. He thinks he was chosen to receive this information from 2109 because the information is saved with him.
Many people are highly skeptical about the events related in the Vertical Plane book. Quite rightly so, given the degree of strangeness. But I am not. I left no stone unturned and used cutting-edge science to get to the truth. In fact, I believe it was the first computer-controlled psychic investigation recorded in the world. I know it really happened. It changed my life forever. It is going to change yours. The book will, one day, be ISBN recorded under the history section. It is a monumental, historical marker in the ribbon of time.
Is he right? I guess time will tell. I don't know if the Dodelston messages story can be debunked, but it can certainly be contested. But I have to admit, a lot of the story can be confirmed. Now, Ken and Debbie haven't cashed in, and they seem to be very nice, intelligent, reasonable people. And after the BBC program, they sought no further publicity about the story, even knowing how many books they can sell. And Ken said back then, now, just over 10 years after our own adventures, the sad but good advice seems to be to keep quiet about it. Meadow Cottage was important to us. It is sufficient. And although Debbie can be found online, Ken prefers privacy, and I think we should respect that. All we can hope for is that one day, buried under the dusty, faded stacks in the Brasenose Library at Oxford, someone will discover a mysterious book, handwritten in Latin, a book that tells a fantastic tale of a relationship between people across time. People, though initially fearful and skeptical of one another, establish a friendship that would change all their lives. And this book, when finally discovered, will change everyone's life, everywhere, forever.
3+15+00.
Still a great story. And after that came out, I actually got an email from Deb, who agreed to come on and talk to me and tell me what I got right, what I got wrong, and give some more details about the story. So maybe when the podcast studio is ready, we'll have her in to talk about it.
When the podcast studio is ready is your new motto.
Yeah, it's taken a while, but we'll get there.
So you say.
Next is the story of the Count of Saint Germain. Now, this is episode 58 and 59, so it's a two-part episode. Now, when this came out...
You were fat.
I was, but that's not what I'm talking about.
I know, Chunk. I just wanted to remind you.
Thanks.
Baby, Ruth, baby. What? Goonies.
I know, but enough with the Sloth Chunk Goonies references, okay?
Fine.
When this
you guys. Okay. It's out of my system now. Go ahead.
When this video came out, only about 1,000 people were following the channel. And that was good and bad because I would respond to every comment that anyone left. For 2 years, if you left a comment on one of my videos, you heard back from me within a couple of hours. But a problem with that is, with so few comments, I would take all of them very seriously. And I was starting to get hate mail from people who didn't like the debunking part of the stories. They said that I was ruining their favorite myths. So I had this idea that, okay, well, if they hate it, I have to change it. So with the Count of Saint Germain, I split it into 2 episodes. One episode is the myth, and then the second episode is the truth. I figured if people just want to watch the myth, they can watch that. If people want the whole story, they can watch both. But I didn't want to release them a week apart because that would seem like cheating, like trying to get extra clicks. This was such a mess. So I released both videos the same day, about 4 hours apart. Part 1, and then 4 hours later, part 2. So subscribers started getting notifications about part 1 and part 2, or just one or the other, and they were watching them out of order. It was a mess. It was a huge mistake, and it's a mistake I will not repeat. I still make plenty of mistakes.
I like overeating.
Here's both parts. See you in a minute. In 1745, a mysterious man was arrested in London and charged with spying. He called himself the Count of Saint Germain, and for almost 200 years, the Count of Saint Germain was present at every significant political event in the world, and always looked the same age. Some say he walked the earth during the time of Christ. Some say he walks the earth still. This is his story. 1745 was a difficult time in England. The Jacobites, propped up by the French monarchy, had seized Edinburgh that summer. England was capturing, imprisoning, and executing spies everywhere. The man who called himself the Count of Saint-Germain was arrested in a coffee shop under suspicion of espionage and was taken in for questioning. The Count's captors quickly learned that he was fluent in every European language and other languages from around the world. Still, he wouldn't tell them where he was from or what his name was. Horace Walpole, the Prime Minister's son, wrote that Saint-Germain could sing, compose, and play the violin so well that one would have thought he was a famous musician. Though he appeared about 45 years old, nobody had seen him before. While in custody, he gave details about historical events that only an eyewitness would know. Saint-Germain's jailers found him extremely odd. And during this time of rebellion, foreigners in England were imprisoned simply for being foreign. Yet somehow, without giving his real name, age, or place of birth, the Count of Saint-Germain was set free. Word quickly got around about this strange man who could speak every language, compose music, and who spoke of history as if he lived it. When the Prince of Wales heard the stories, he wanted to know more, so he sent for the Count. But it didn't matter. The Count of Saint-Germain was gone. When Western soldiers returned from the Crusades, they brought with them legends from the East. And one of those was the story of Cartaphilus, also known as the Wandering Jew. As Jesus dragged his cross on the way to Calvary, he stopped to catch his breath. Cartaphilus stepped into the street and told Jesus to stop resting and move along. Jesus said to Cartaphilus, "I shall go and I will rest, but you shall not rest until I return." Cartaphilus didn't know what Jesus meant by this, but as the years passed, Cartaphilus's friends and family grew old and died, though he never aged. He was destined to walk the earth immortal until Christ's return. Now, this was taken to be nothing more than a story until 1228, when an Armenian bishop spoke of having dinner with a strange man who spoke of history as if he was there. The man called himself Cartaphilus. For centuries after, Cartaphilus was seen in the Middle East, then Europe. It seemed as if the Wandering Jew was wandering west. Then one day, a mysterious stranger arrived in Paris. He dressed simply but elegantly in all black. He wore diamonds from head to toe. He had rings on every finger and even had diamond buckles on his shoes. He appeared to be about 45 years old, and he called himself the Count of Saint-Germain. When the Count of Saint-Germain arrived in Paris, he appeared out of nowhere, but he made an instant impression on the social class. He was obviously a man of significant means, but nobody knew where he came from or where he got his money. He became the must-have guest at any dinner party. He was a talented pianist, a singer, and he could play the violin so beautifully that people were moved to tears. And he was a brilliant conversationalist who would dazzle anyone, no matter where they were from. He was fluent in French, English, Spanish, Italian, Russian, Dutch, German, and Portuguese, and native speakers couldn't detect an accent. The Count could also speak conversational Polish, Chinese, Arabic, ancient Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit. He had immense knowledge about everything: science, art, philosophy, politics. But where he really excelled? History. He would give accounts of the lives of Henry VIII, Nero, Cleopatra, and famous historical figures. And when asked how he could know so much about people that had been dead for hundreds of years, the Count would simply smile and say, "I was there." He even claimed to have met Jesus Christ personally.
The Wandering Jew.
Right. This would make the Count well over 1,000 years old, which brought challenges from Parisian skeptics. But whenever another historian would try to stump the Count on obscure details, the Count always knew the answers. In addition to being a talented musician, artist, and historian, he was also a gifted alchemist. He claimed he discovered the secret of the Philosopher's Stone, a process that can change base metals into gold. He said he had discovered the elixir for life, which is how he accounted for his youthful appearance. Saint-Germain even impressed the famous philosopher Voltaire, one of the keenest minds at the time. And Voltaire said of Saint-Germain, "He is the man who knows everything and never dies." Now, I admit, the story of the Count of Saint-Germain sounds fantastic and supernatural, but everything we know about him comes from eyewitness accounts. But the only way to really know if the Count was telling the truth about his age is to find someone who knew him in the past and could identify him in the present. Turns out, there was such a person. One evening, the Count of Saint-Germain was mingling with the elites in Paris, and Countess von Georgi recognized him from when he was in Venice in 1710, about 50 years earlier. The Countess asked Saint-Germain if he perhaps had a father or grandfather who was in Venice at the time. He said, "No, madam, it was I who had the honor of paying you court." The Countess couldn't believe it. She said the man she had met 50 years ago wasn't more than 45 years old. And here was Saint-Germain, who looked the same age. In fact, she thought he might have even looked a few years younger. He said, "Madam, I am very old." And he went on to give her details of their meeting. And she was stunned and said, "That must make you over 100 years old." The Count smiled and said, "This is not impossible." Soon after that, word reached King Louis, who found the stories entertaining, but he didn't give it much thought. But when the king learned that the Count had a process for removing the flaws from gems and turning lead into gold, the king said, "Bring this man to me at once." The Count of Saint-Germain accepted the king's invitation and immediately left for the palace at Versailles. When the Count of Saint-Germain arrived at the royal palace in Versailles, he was an instant sensation. Casanova himself wrote about their first meeting. He said the Count of Saint-Germain was a scholar, linguist, musician, and chemist, and as a conversationalist was unequaled. And Casanova noted the Count never ate. He would sip mineral water and occasionally drink herbal tea, but he never saw him consume food of any kind.
He's a vampire.
Well, that's one of the theories. The Count had traveled to the palace with an assortment of equipment and substances that he used for his alchemy experiments. He created makeup and special face wash for the ladies of the court, which they swore made them look years younger. And he told the king of a process he invented for colors and dyes that would increase the value of French fabrics. But the king wasn't interested in fabric. He wanted to know about the Count's abilities with precious stones. The Count said he had just spent 5 years with the Shah of Persia, who taught him an ancient and closely guarded technique for removing flaws from diamonds, and even creating larger diamonds by melting smaller ones together. Now, the king was skeptical at this claim, to which the Count replied, "Your Majesty, I have witnessed Christ turn water into wine. Diamonds are a mere trifle." The king proposed a test. King Louis had a diamond that was valued at 6,000 francs, but without its flaw, it would be worth 10,000 francs or more. The Count said he could remove the flaw in a month. A month later, he returned with the diamond, flawless. King Louis's jeweler examined it and valued the stone at 9,600 francs. The king was impressed and set the Count up with his own laboratory right there in the palace. The Count of Saint-Germain became a fixture at Versailles. For the next couple of years, the Count worked all day in his private lab and spent all night dazzling the king's guests. But one day the king went to pay the Count a visit, and once again, the Count of Saint-Germain was gone. Throughout the 18th century, the Count of Saint-Germain would pop up all over the world. He was seen by Sir Robert Clive in India. He was at The Hague trying to broker peace between Prussia and Austria. Anton Mesmer, namesake of the word mesmerize, received the Count when Mesmer was a young physicist in Germany. He said Saint-Germain possessed a vast understanding of the workings of the human mind and had been directly responsible for teaching Mesmer the art of hypnosis. Some say this was how the Count was able to talk his way out of the English prison.
Jedi mind trick?
Yep.
I'm not the Count you're looking for.
You're not the Count we're looking for.
Move along.
Move along.
Move along.
Move along. The Count was in Russia and helped bring Catherine the Great to the throne. He was in Holland attempting to end the 7 Years' War. He met up with Casanova again in the north of France, where he, according to Casanova's own memoirs, turned a pocket coin into gold. In all of these accounts, Saint-Germain appears 45 years old. After the death of Louis XV, the Count of Saint-Germain suddenly reappeared at Versailles, and he warned King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette of the coming revolution. He said a giant conspiracy would disrupt the entire nation, and the king was in danger. Now, the royal couple dismissed him, but in her memoirs, Marie Antoinette wrote that she wished she had taken the Count more seriously. In the summer of 1776, the Second Continental Congress gathered in Philadelphia to sign the Declaration of Independence, but the meeting wasn't going smoothly. Some delegates feared war with England, the most powerful country on the planet. Then, just as talks were breaking down, a voice thundered from the back of the room and gave a rousing speech about courage, commitment, and freedom. Inspired by these words, the delegates immediately rushed forward. John Hancock had barely finished signing when another took up his quill. America would be free. When the men looked up to thank this gentleman, he was gone. His name was never recorded, and though the room was locked and guarded, he was able to enter and leave without anyone seeing him. All that's known is that he was a man of average height and build, dressed all in black, who appeared about 45 years old. In 1779, Saint Germain befriended Prince Charles of Germany and spent the next 5 years as a guest in the prince's castle. Then, on February 27, 1784, the Count of Saint Germain died of pneumonia. He was laid to rest at a local church, and his funeral service was attended by many of the people whose lives the Count had affected.
Oh, that's it?
But in 1785, a year after his death, the Count of Saint Germain had returned. In 1785, a year after the Count of Saint Germain supposedly died, he was seen once again with Anton Mesmer in Germany. Later that year, the French Freemasons had chosen as their representative the Count of Saint Germain. He was seen at the taking of the Bastille in 1789 and at the execution of Marie Antoinette. Almost 40 years later, the Count was seen in Paris several times by Mademoiselle d'Adhemar, who had known him from years before. She wrote in her diary that she was amazed that every time she saw him, he still looked 45 years old. In 1870, Emperor Napoleon III was so fascinated by the Count that he created a special commission to investigate him. A year later, a mysterious fire destroyed all the records they'd gathered.
Suspicious!
It is. In 1877, Saint Germain was seen again at a Freemason lodge in Venice. In 1896, Theosophists Annie Besant and Madame Blavatsky said the Count had been in contact with them. He claimed to be of an immortal race who come from a civilization hidden beneath the Himalayas.
What's a theosophist?
Well, theosophy is a religion that claims there's an ancient and secretive brotherhood of spiritual beings known as the Masters, and these Masters are said to have great wisdom and supernatural powers.
Checks out.
In 1914, during World War I, the Count was captured by 2 Bavarian soldiers. They said he spoke many languages and wouldn't tell them where he was from. But he did say the war would end in 1918. The soldiers thought he was crazy, but they let the man ramble. The Count said that a tyrant from the lower classes would wear an ancient symbol and lead Germany into another global war in 1939. And that Germany would be defeated in 6 years, but not before committing unspeakable acts of violence. The soldiers were so unsettled by the strange man that they let him go.
I'm not the Count you're looking for.
Right. In 1930, Guy Ballard met the Count of Saint Germain on Mount Shasta in California, and Ballard claimed Saint Germain was one of several ascended masters like Jesus Christ. And Ballard formed an entire religion called the I Am Activity movement around Saint Germain's teachings. At one point, the I Am religion had over 1 million members, and it still exists today. And there are many other sightings of the Count throughout history, but these are the most well-known and best documented. So that leaves us to 2 big questions. First, was the Count of Saint Germain a real person? Well, he most definitely was. There's no debate about it. But was he immortal? Well, we'll address that in part 2.
Wait, what? You're not gonna tell us now?
Nope.
That's a bunch of bullshit.
I have a reason for doing this. In part 2, we'll see if we can separate the myths from the facts and figure out who the Count of Saint Germain really was.
I still say bullshit.
3+15+00.
In part 1, we talked about the mysterious Count of Saint Germain. He's been called a prophet, a sorcerer, and an immortal. He's been spotted all over the world for 1,000 years. Some say, and even the Count himself said, that he was Cartophilus, the legendary wandering Jew cursed by Jesus with immortality. The Count of Saint Germain advised kings, queens, and emperors. He was present at every significant event in European history, and even was an important contributor to America's struggle for independence. He spoke 12 languages fluently. He played piano and violin like a virtuoso. He was an expert in art, science, politics, philosophy, and history. He left an impression on everyone he met. But today, we'll see if we can separate the man from the myth. In paranormal history, there isn't a more fascinating figure than the Count of Saint Germain, and there are countless stories about him spanning hundreds of years. But how many of these stories are true? Every story about the Count has him fluent in 12 languages, and speaks so well that he fools native speakers. This isn't accurate. In historical records, the first we hear about Saint Germain is his arrest in 1745 for being a spy. But the quote is never printed in full. When English authorities arrested Saint Germain, they said he spoke Spanish and Portuguese like a native speaker, and he was fluent in Italian and spoke French with a Piedmont accent. He spoke in broken English, enough to get by, but nowhere near fluent. They assumed he was from Spain or Portugal. Now, it is true that King Louis was very taken with him, but King Louis was not a deep thinker. The king's chief advisors considered Saint Germain an arrogant impostor, and the king's doctor said he was a quack. And the count disappeared from France for several years, not because of some spiritual mission, but because the king's chief minister ordered his arrest, so he fled the country. When Saint Germain turned Casanova's coin into gold, it wasn't through a chemical process, it was sleight of hand, something that irritated Casanova. And Casanova met him a few times and said he was brilliant, but Casanova also said the count was a con man, a spy, or both. When Saint Germain fixed the king's diamond, the diamond the count brought back was of a different cut and slightly larger. Saint Germain said the diamond becoming larger was part of the process.
He had an answer for everything.
Everything. Madame Pompadour, the king's chief mistress, was very familiar with precious stones, and she looked through a box of the count's gems, laughed, and said they were fake. She did say they were very pretty, but still fake. Now, yes, Voltaire did say that the Count of Saint Germain is the man who knows everything and never dies. I've seen this quoted a million times. But what's rarely said is, Voltaire was being sarcastic. He was pretty much saying, oh yeah, that guy. Now, the story about the Countess who recognizes him from 50 years ago, that happened, but the entire story isn't often told. The Countess, who was almost 90, was senile, and everybody knew this. Even Saint Germain said so. When the Countess thought she met Saint Germain years earlier, she simply made a mistake and set a legend in motion.
Oh, what about him eating Jesus and all that?
Right. Those stories got started because an English comedian named Millard Gower started impersonating Saint Germain as part of his act. And every time Gower performed, the stories got crazier.
Wait, so this guy's a legend because some comic was doing a bit?
Yep. Remember, the Count's last stop was the castle of Prince Edward in Germany. Prince Edward said the Count of Saint Germain was a small, gray-haired, elderly man, not a chatty 45-year-old. And when Saint Germain died in 1784... Allegedly, his death was witnessed, and his belongings were meticulously documented. There were no diamonds, no elixirs, and the only money to his name was about 80 Reich dollars.
Ooh, how many millions is that?
It's about $100.
Oh.
When Theosophist Madame Blavatsky said she had Saint Germain's secret documents, she actually had a copy of a memoir written a few years earlier. And the memoir didn't contain mystical knowledge, just biographical information and stories about a charming man who was good at talking people's ears off. Eventually, Blavatsky was exposed as a fraud by a whistleblower in her movement. But plenty of occultists were fans of the Count. Look, maybe Guy Ballard really did meet Saint Germain on Mount Shasta. I don't know, I wasn't there. But I do know that Ballard plagiarized a lot of his material from science fiction books and was found guilty of fraud, so you be the judge.
So do we know who he really was?
Maybe. The Count of Saint Germain is said to be from everywhere. Some say he was a high priest from Atlantis, or he was a prophet from the Middle East. He's said to be Merlin the Wizard, Plato, St. Alban, Christopher Columbus, one of the last Templar Knights. People claim that Roger Bacon was the Count. Then they claimed Francis Bacon was the Count.
Well, what about Kevin Bacon?
I wouldn't be surprised. Kevin Bacon's been around a long time. Now, on his deathbed, the Count of Saint Germain confessed that he was the son of Francis Rákóczi II, Prince of Transylvania, and he was 88 years old. To avoid being a political target, he was sent to Italy to study with the last of the Medicis. Now, this would explain his wealth, his excellent education, and why he spoke so many languages. But still, if this story were true, he would have been almost 70 years old when he was at Versailles, not 45. And his father, Prince Francis, would have been 15 years old when the Count was born. Not impossible, not likely. Another theory is that Saint Germain was an Alsatian Jew named Simon Wolf, born around 1700, and he hid his identity to avoid religious persecution. Others say he was a Spanish Jesuit named Aymar. His true title was the Marquis de Betmar from Portugal. This explains why his Spanish and Portuguese sounded so perfect. None other than P.T. Barnum took an interest in the Count and did his own research. And nobody knows a good scammer better than Barnum. Using Barnum's research and the research from other historians, I think the best theory is that Saint Germain was the son of an Italian princess. The princess had an illicit affair with an Italian tax collector. When the Count was a child, he was separated from his mother. He was given a world-class education, a lump sum of money, and instructions to hide his true identity. This theory suggests he was born around 1690 in a region of Italy called San Germano.
What does San Germano mean in English?
Saint-Germain.
Yeah, I should have put that together myself.
San Germano is on the northern border of Italy and Switzerland. Directly to the west is France. And this region is called Piedmont. That so-called unidentifiable accent he spoke with, native speakers identified his accent as distinctly Piedmont, something that's been documented. And if he had been born in this area, he would have grown up speaking French, Italian, and German interchangeably. The jump to speaking Spanish and Portuguese from there isn't difficult. And if you're fluent in French and German, English would come pretty easily too. But still, these are just theories. Nobody except the Count himself knew his true origin. He enjoyed the mystery that surrounded him, so he fed into his own myth wherever he could. He was a legend, yes, but a legendary con man. He never stole from anyone, but he was perfectly happy to live rent-free in castles, palaces, and lavish apartments all over Europe. The Count was a brilliant man who used his charm and intellect to befriend wealthy, influential people to support his lifestyle. Eventually, his charm and money ran out, and he died virtually penniless. Even in the face of all this evidence, many people still believe he is an immortal who walks the earth to this day. I don't. But the legend of the Count of Saint-Germain is such a good one, I want to be wrong. But I can tell you this for certain. If I'm ever sitting on a quiet mountain and approached by a mysterious man who claims to be the Count of Saint-Germain, I'll be skeptical. But still, I'm going to listen to what that man has to say, because you never know. Next up is the story of John Teeter. Now, this is the time-traveling soldier from about 100 years in the future who has to come back to the past to get a computer component. He's part of, I don't want to spoil it, but he's apparently in the future, the military has a time-traveling unit, and John Teeter is a soldier in that unit. Now, this is a great story that we really owe to Art Bell. We owe the whole channel to Art Bell. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I'm a huge Art Bell fan. But if you had to rank the top 5 Art Bell stories, John Teeter would be on that list. This is a great one. Now, this is a long episode, so settle in.
Need some ice cream, potato chips, pork rinds.
Well, this is episode 80, so I've lost about 20 pounds by now.
Oh, no, I like the chunky human.
Sorry.
He wasn't as cranky.
Well, pardon me for trying to be healthy.
See what I mean? Eat a donut and chill out, jeez.
3+15+00.
This is our future. The United States of America endures a second civil war, killing millions. Immediately after that, a world war begins. Nuclear weapons are used. Billions are killed. The aftermath leaves the earth in ruins. Electric grids are down. Food becomes scarce. Disease is rampant. Society breaks down. Then in 2038, all computers go offline. Civilization is set back several hundred years. The world enters a second dark age. Only by changing events in our past and present can we avoid this nightmare of a future. In 1998, in a small town in Florida, John Teeter was born. In the year 2036, John, a temporal soldier, would be sent back in time. His mission? Save the world. On July 29, 1998, Art Bell, host of Coast to Coast AM, was running what he called open timelines. He wanted calls from people who claimed to be time travelers. Obviously, this brought out plenty of kooks. But then a fax came in that felt eerily real.
Dear Art, I had a fax when I heard other time travelers calling in from any time past the year 2500 AD. Please let me explain. Time travel was invented in 2034. Offshoots of
certain successful fusion reactor research allowed scientists at CERN to produce the world's first contained singularity engine. The basic design involves rotating singularities inside a magnetic field. By altering the speed and direction of rotation, you can travel both forward and backward in time. Time itself can be understood in terms of connected lines. When you go back in time, you travel on your original timeline. When you turn your singularity engine off, a new timeline is created due to the fact that you and your time machine are now there. Some interesting outcomes of this are, 1, you meet yourself. I have done it often, even taken a younger version of myself along for a few rides, before returning myself to the new timeline and going back to mine. 2, you can alter history in the new universe that you have just created. Most of the time, the changes are subtle. Sometimes I'll notice car models that don't exist or books that come out late. Unfortunately, it was also discovered that anyone going forward in time, for my 2036, hit a brick wall in the year 2564. Please pray that we discover
the reason why there is no apparent future after 2564.
A few days later, a second fax came in.
Dear Mr. Bell, I'm glad you're back. I faxed this information to you the day before you left the air. As I said then, I'm a time traveler. I have been on this world line since April of this year, and I plan to leave soon. Typically, time travelers do not purposely affect the world lines they visit. However, this mission is unusually long, and I've grown attached to some of the people I have met here. Anyway, for my own reasons, I have decided to help this world line by sharing information about the future with a few people, in the hope that it will help their future. I realize my claims are a bit difficult to accept, so I will send the following once I know you have received this fax. A few pages from the operations manual of my time machine, and a few colored photographs of my vehicle. If you wish to contact me, I will be happy to share with you the nature of time, the physics of time travel, and some of the events of your future.
Art Bell didn't hear from this person again, which was too bad because he offered to show proof. Everybody who heard that broadcast wanted to see a working time machine, learn the science behind time travel, and know events from the future. 2 years later, they would get their wish. A little over 2 years after the time traveler sent faxes to Art Bell, a user who called himself Time Traveler Zero and later John Teeter created an account on a message board called the Time Travel Institute. On November 2nd, 2000, he submitted his first post.
Greetings. I am a time traveler from the year 2036. I am on my way home after getting an IBM 5100 computer system from the year 1975. My time machine is a stationary mass temporal displacement unit manufactured by General Electric. The unit is powered by two top-spin, dual-positive singularities that produce a standard offset Tipler sinusoid. I will be happy to post pictures of the unit.
Now, before we get into it, I have to be fair and say there were plenty of people on the message board who were skeptical, who wouldn't be. But John Teeter was very specific and seemed to have very specialized knowledge. First off, a Tipler sinusoid or Tipler cylinder is a theoretical method of time travel outlined in a paper by Frank Tipler in 1974. So we're off to an interesting start. But what about the IBM 5100? Why would anyone with the technology to travel through time need a computer that was, in 2036, about 80 years old? Well, John Teeter said the 5100 was needed to debug legacy computer programs in 2036 because Unix has a problem in 2038. Well, that's true. Remember the Y2K scare? The fear was hardware and software that measure the year in 2 digits would freak out when the year changed from 99 to 00. Now, the world didn't end as some people anticipated, but Y2K did cause some sporadic problems. Something similar is going to happen in 2038, and it could be worse. Unix systems measure time in seconds. A Unix timestamp is the number of seconds since January 1st, 1970. So the Unix timestamp 1 minute after that date is 60. The timestamp 1 hour after that date is 3600, and up it goes. As I write this, the Unix timestamp is 166-413-1870, so about 1.6 billion seconds. Without getting too geeky, a 32-bit integer can only go as high as about 2.1 billion. The official last date that a 32-bit system can recognize is Tuesday, January 19th, 2038. After that, things could get interesting.
Ooh, interesting is never good.
It's not. And the way to solve this is by upgrading systems to 64 bits.
And how far in the future does that get us?
Well, the max 64-bit number is about 9.2 quintillion. So that gets us to the year 292 billion and change.
Oh, that should be enough.
It will be.
So what does an old computer have to do with this?
Well, John Teeter said the IBM 5100 could help them debug legacy code. And this is actually correct. Most personal computers, like the IBM 5100, could only support the basic programming language. But the 5100 had special functionality that was hidden from the public. It could run programs written in BASIC, but it could also run APL programs written for IBM mainframes. That's useful. Only the IBM engineers who designed it knew this secret. They were afraid of how competitors might use it. In 2002, NASA was buying old gear on eBay because that was the only way to find Intel 8086 chips, which they needed for various missions. So this is something that happens. So John Titor's first post contained a lot of sound science and information that wasn't well known at the time. But he was just getting started. John Titor was very active on the message board. He would answer any question anyone had. He just wouldn't talk about things like the stock market or who would win the Super Bowl. He said he wasn't interested in helping anyone get rich, and even if he was, he couldn't remember who won a Super Bowl 35 years ago. But John Titor also said that predictions like that could be wrong because he was from a different timeline, which he called a world line. How he explained it was, imagine a cone where the diameter of the cone is how different the destination time is from your own. You enter the time machine at the tip of the cone. The further backward or forward in time you go, the larger the divergence. Titor said that when he arrived in the year 2000, the divergence was about 1 or 2%. Now that's not a lot, but it's enough where different teams could win different games. What Titor is describing is the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, where anything that can possibly happen does happen, it just happens in a different timeline. Titor specifically referred to the Everett-Wheeler model, which again shows a good grasp of quantum mechanics and the scientists working in the field. And even though John Titor wouldn't make petty predictions, he would describe his life and the future in detail. John said that in the early 2000s, there would be a Waco-type event every month that steadily gets worse. The Civil War in the United States starts in 2004, and the war affects everyone. At the age of 13, John joins a shotgun infantry unit called the Fighting Diamondbacks, and the war continues until 2015 and finally ends with what he calls a very short World War III. Taking advantage of America's weakness, Russia attacked cities in the United States, China, and Europe. The United States retaliated, and as a result, 3 billion people are killed. The only people to survive are the ones who don't live in the big cities. In the aftermath of the war, the United States is split into 5 separate regions. Each region elects its own president, and all 5 presidents serve a new, very diminished federal government in the capital, which has been moved to Omaha, Nebraska.
In 2036, I live in Central Florida with my family. I'm currently stationed at an Army base in Tampa. A world war in 2015 killed nearly 3 billion people. The people that survived grew closer together. Life is centered on the family and then the community. I cannot imagine living even a few hundred miles away from my parents. There's no large industrial complex creating masses of useless food and recreational items. Food and livestock is grown and sold locally. People spend much more time reading and talking together face to face. Religion is taken seriously, and everyone can multiply and divide in their heads.
This new world is now a simpler place. More focus is placed on family, the community, and religion. The biggest fear John Titor has is mad cow disease, which has become a worldwide pandemic. John transfers into a military unit with 7 other time travelers, and their job is to go back and try and prevent as much environmental damage as possible. The narrative John Titor creates is very detailed, and I'll link to a page where you can read every one of his posts. And even though people on the message board were entertained and fascinated, they were skeptical. They wanted to know, 1, can you tell us how your time travel device works? And 2, can you show us a picture of it? The answer was yes, and yes. John Titor posted diagrams of his time travel device, pictures of the operator's manual, and even pictures of the device itself. According to John, time travel is discovered in 2034 by scientists at CERN. Using this breakthrough technology, General Electric actually creates working time travel devices. These machines go through various iterations and improvements. The time travel unit John Titor uses is a C204 gravity distortion time displacement unit, which operates using microsingularities, or tiny black holes.
The source of power for the C204 that allows it to distort and manipulate gravity comes from 2 microsingularities that were created, captured, and cleaned at a much larger and circular facility. The dual event horizons of each one and their mass is manipulated by ejecting electrons onto the surface of their respective ergospheres. The electricity comes from batteries. The breakthrough that will allow for this technology will occur within a year or so when CERN brings their larger facility online.
John Titor talks about Kerr black holes, which are black holes that rotate, and Tipler cylinders. Now, these are real theories in physics that involve time travel. One of the most interesting pieces of technology in John Titer's time machine is called a variable gravity lock system, or VGL. Since the machine only travels through time and not space, the VGL makes sure that the Earth is in the same place in orbit when it reaches its destination. Otherwise, you end up floating in space, which is not ideal.
The hard part of traveling through time is not the bending of gravity, but the plotting of your course and holding to the basic position in your environment. This is done through a system called VGL, Variable Gravity Lock. In effect, it holds you to the Earth. During travel, it periodically checks to see that the field is not varied. If it does, it stops and reverses course or drops out at that point. Buildings and other terrain features are avoided in the same way. As soon as the VGL sensors pick up an unexpected mass in the target world line, it would shut down.
The C-204 has an array of computers, clocks, and sensors to get you to the correct date. But because timelines get more and more different the further forward or back you go, the unit maxes out at about 60 years. Someone asked him about traveling back 1,000 years. John said that you wouldn't even recognize that world.
The distortion unit reaches its target destination by using very sensitive gravity sensors and atomic clocks. The basic unit of calculation is the second. So yes, in a sense you do dial in a date, and the computer system controls the distortion field. At maximum power, the unit I have is capable of traveling about 10 years an hour. Unfortunately, time travel is not an exact science. There is inherent error and chaos in the computer's ability to make accurate calculations. Based on the current technology of the clocks and sensors, distortion units are only accurate to about 60 years or so. So no, in 2036 we are unable to travel back 1,000 years due to the error rate in the system. The divergence between the world line of origin and the target world line would be too great. If one were to try and travel back that far, history would look nothing like what you would expect. In other words, if I wanted to go back 2,000 years and meet Christ, there is a better than average chance I would end up on a world line where he was never born.
Hold on. One of those pictures, it looked like a bucket seat with a seatbelt.
Yep, that's because on John Titer's first trip, the time machine was mounted inside a 67 Chevy.
No, I guess a DeLorean is too on the nose.
Well, the reason for the Chevy and why John later moved the machine to a truck is because the C-204 is heavy. It needs a vehicle with a suspension that can handle the weight. Plus, the time machine has to be mobile. Since it only travels through time and not space, you have to drive to your physical destination first and then move through time. He chose those vehicles because they blend into the times he was traveling to.
No, did he say what it feels like to time travel? Like, does it hurt? Does your face get all stretchy?
Well, John Titer does talk about this.
The gravity field generated by the unit overtakes you very quickly. You feel a tug toward the unit similar to rising quickly in an elevator, and it continues to rise based on the power setting the unit is working under. At 100% power, the constant pull of gravity can be as high as 2 Gs or more, depending on how close you are to the unit. There are no serious side effects, but I try to avoid eating before a flight. No bright flash of light is seen. Outside, the vehicle appears to accelerate as the light is bent around it. We have to wear sunglasses or close our eyes, as this happens due to a short burst of ultraviolet radiation. Personally, I think it looks like you're driving under a rainbow. After that, it appears to fade to black and remains totally black until the unit is turned off. We're advised to keep the windows closed as a great deal of heat builds up outside the car. The gravity field also traps a small air pocket around the car that acts as your only O2 supply, unless you bring compressed air with you.
2 Gs, ugh. I can never time travel because of my IBS.
That's TMI.
No, it's IBS.
Never mind. Naturally, people were skeptical of all this technology, but John Titer didn't really care.
My goal is not to be believed. Most people do not take news of the war very well, but I find that everyone believes it's inevitable. I watch every day what you are doing as a society. While you sit by and watch your constitution being torn away from you, you willfully eat poisoned food buy manufactured products no one needs, and turn an uncaring eye away from millions of people suffering and dying all around you. Perhaps I should let you all in on a little secret. No one likes you in the future. This time period is looked at as being full of lazy, self-centered, civically ignorant sheep. Perhaps you should be less concerned about me and more concerned about that.
You know, he makes a lot of good points, but there's no reason to be a dick about it.
John Teeter's face was never seen, his voice was never heard, and John Teeter is not his real name, so there's not much we know about him. But one person did have a close relationship with John, or at least claimed to. Pamela Moore. Pamela was very active on the message boards and spent a lot of time chatting with John over IM. Before John Teeter left, he said he would make a departure video and send it to Pamela.
How's she supposed to know the video's legit?
Well, because John provided Pamela with a secret song to act as a password. This is something only the two of them know, so she could identify imposters. And to this day, the departure video has not arrived, and Pamela has never revealed the secret song. On March 24th, 2001, John Teeter would leave his final message and some words of wisdom.
I will be leaving this world line shortly, and this will be my final post. There are only a handful of people who will know exactly when I will be leaving, and I'm sure they will let you know when I'm gone. In the last few days, I have found your choice of topics quite interesting. And from an objective viewpoint, I think it collectively answers one of your own questions. If time travel is real, where are all the time travelers? In the past, I've stated that, quite frankly, you all scare the hell out of me. And I'm sure other temporal drivers would feel the same. But now I have an expanded explanation. A while ago, I related an experience I had with my parents while we were driving down a highway. Every now and then, we would pass someone who was in obvious distress with their vehicle. I was amazed that so many people could pass them without stopping to help. Their explanation was fear. The risk of helping someone was too great, and with today's technology, it probably had a cell phone anyway. If they didn't, the walk to a gas station would be good for them and teach them a lesson for running out of gas. This is why time travelers do not show themselves. In trying to help you, we put ourselves at great risk, and there's really no point to it. I already know you won't pay any attention or believe me because we've already been through it on this world line. Besides, I think the walk to the gas station will do you some good. I also want to thank Pamela for helping me with the email and everyone else who asked intelligent and insightful questions. I have learned a great deal. My parting thought revolves around something JC has been harping on since day one. No, I do not have a secret agenda, but I've been paying a great deal of attention to your world line. My interaction with you was not a direct mission parameter, but it was a secondary mission protocol based on standing orders given to all temporal drivers. That secondary objective is basically to gather as much information about a world line based on a set of observable variables when we first arrive. Your world line met those conditions. What amazes me is why no one here wonders why Y2K didn't hit them at all. Bring a gas can with you when the car dies on the side of the road. Farewell, John.
And John Teeter was gone and hasn't been heard from since. But that was really just the beginning of the legend. When the John Teeter story first landed in 2001, it was a sensation. But as the years went on, we've been able to see the accuracy of John's predictions. John predicted a civil war in the United States that would begin in 2005. Obviously, that didn't happen. But you can make the case that America has never been more divided than it is today.
Thanks, Twitter.
20% of adults in a recent survey said they believe a civil war is likely within the next 10 years. That's a high percentage. And John Teeter predicted a nuclear war in 2015, and that too didn't happen. But considering current world events, the last time we were this close to nuclear war was the Cuban Missile Crisis. I actually think we're in more danger now. He predicted there would be no Olympic Games after 2004. Now, he was wrong about that, but there were no 2020 Olympics. John Teeter did get a few things right. There was a mad cow disease outbreak in the early 2000s.
It's America's first confirmed case of bovine spongiform encephalitis in 6 years. BSE is mad cow disease, a potentially deadly brain-wasting infection that can be transferred to humans.
When John Titor was posting in early 2001, most people were still accessing the internet with a dial-up modem. John said in the future, the internet would look more like their current cell phone system. That's exactly right. He said that in the future, the entertainment industry would be decentralized, and anyone would be able to create video which could be watched by many people. More people watch YouTube than watch the networks or even go to the movies. John Titor was right again. He predicted breakthroughs in high-energy physics at CERN. In 2013, the Higgs boson was confirmed. Stephen Hawking originally thought that everything that enters a black hole disappears forever. Titor said that Stephen Hawking made a mistake about this. Stephen Hawking did later change his mind. Now, many of these predictions could be dismissed as educated guesses by someone who was intelligent and knew a lot about science and technology. But there's no denying that John Titor was right. As for the predictions John Titor got wrong, true believers, and there are still a lot of those, always fall back on the many worlds theory. Sure, many of John Titor's predictions were wrong in our timeline, but they came true in other timelines, and there's no way to prove this wrong. But if you look closely at the John Titor story, you do find inconsistencies. You also find convenient coincidences. And because of these problems with the story, many believe that John Titor was a hoax. And if that's true, then who was the real John Titor? Well, there are a few suspects. Whenever anyone does a story about John Titor and who he actually may be, there are a few names that always pop up. The first is Joseph Matheny. He's described as a writer and transmedia artist, and he's mostly known for Ong's Hat, which was one of the first alternate reality or real-time interactive games. And Matheny makes a good case. He said that he, along with 3 other people, developed the John Titor story as a fun experiment to see if they could develop an internet myth.
Mission accomplished.
Matheny won't divulge who the other 3 people are because they're pretty high up in the entertainment industry and have reputations to protect. But a lot of the story tracks. Matheny says the time machine we see in the fuzzy photos was created by a prop designer who's worked on major movies. And John Titor fans have been able to identify pieces of the time machine that are actually real things. Matheny says the reason the messages often have different tones is because they were written by different people on the team. Matheny was responsible for character development. And the reason that John Titor's story is so similar to John Connor's is because it was intentional. Now, I've heard and read some interviews with Matheny, and at first I was skeptical. Initially, I didn't think he had the tech or science background to flesh out the details in the John Titor story. I was very wrong. Matheny was involved in tech since the 80s. He worked with Adobe and Netscape in the early days and holds a few patents. Also, his game, Ong's Hat, had references to theoretical physics. He had the tech chops and a track record in creating online myths. He could have definitely pulled this off. Still, I'd love to see hard evidence. Matheny won't provide any. And when asked, he gets pretty annoyed. He says, believe him or don't, he doesn't care. I think that after 20 years, he's sick of people asking him about John Titor. But there are more people to look at. The other name that comes up in the John Titor story is Larry Haber and the Haber brothers. Larry Haber is a Florida-based entertainment attorney. He claims to represent John Titor's mom, Kay, and the Titor family.
Hey, how does a lawyer sleep?
I don't know how.
Oh, first he lies on one side, and then he lies on the other.
Good one. Now, I've seen and read a number of interviews with Larry Haber. He definitely does not have the technology or science background to create John Titor. But his brothers do. Richard Haber is an IT administrator, and Maury Haber is a very senior cybersecurity professional. Maury also has a lot of experience writing about technology. And if you go down the John Titor rabbit hole on YouTube, you'll eventually run into a channel called Hoax Hunter, run by John Rasmus Houston, and I'll link to his channel below. Now, John has done a ton of research on the subject. He's tracked P.O. boxes, he's done text comparisons of Maury Haber's writing to John Titor's posts, he's tracked all the usernames from John Titor's message board. I mean, this is exhaustive research. He's convinced that John Titor is actually Maury Haber, who eventually enlisted his lawyer brother to represent the story.
Now, what does a lawyer get when you give him Viagra?
What?
Taller!
Have a problem with lawyers, do you?
I've been divorced 3 times. What do you think?
Larry Haber has been attached to John Titor for years. Not only does he claim to represent the Titor family, in 2003, he registered the John Titor Foundation, LLC, a for-profit business, and this LLC published John Titor's posts as a book called A Time Traveler's Tale. Larry Haber also registered John Titor as a trademark in 2007.
So this lawyer claims to represent the Titor family, right?
Yeah,
And at the same time, he's got businesses and books and is making money from this thing?
that's right.
Isn't that a conflict of interest?
I think it is, but I guess Larry Haber and the Titor family are okay with it. He won't say.
Hey, how do you get a lawyer out of a tree?
How?
Cut the rope.
Joseph Matheny said he had someone reach out to the publisher of Larry Haber's book and get it pulled. Larry Haber can't confirm that Matheny did this, but he did confirm that the book is out of print and doesn't know why.
So this Matheny guy torpedoed the lawyer?
That's what it looks like.
He's okay in my book. Hey, what do you have when a lawyer is buried up to his neck in sand?
What do you have?
Not enough sand. I got 1 million of them. Oh, baby.
In Larry Haber's defense, even though he represents the Titor family, he doesn't claim to believe the story. He says he doesn't know one way or the other and doesn't care. He's just working for his client.
And making money from his client.
Yeah, and that. Pamela Moore said she was sent a copy of Larry Haber's book, signed by John with a song quoted at the end.
Was it the secret song?
Nope.
How do you know if a lawyer is lying? His
lips are
moving.
Over 20 years later, and the John Titor story still fascinates people. Honestly, I had never considered doing this story because it's been done so many times, but it's one of the most requested topics on the channel. I think the reason we love time travel stories is because it all comes down to possibilities and opportunities. A story about a possible future, especially such a frightening one, gives us an opportunity to reflect on our present and choose a path to avoid that dark future, or it gives us a chance to prepare for it. Think of how useful it would be if someone came back from that future to warn us, to give us the exact steps to follow to ensure our survival. Well, before John Titor disappeared, he did just that.
Do not eat or use products from any animal that is fed and eats parts of its own dead. Do not kiss or have intimate relations with anyone you do not know. Learn basic sanitation and water purification. Be comfortable around firearms. Learn to shoot and clean a gun. Get a good first aid kit and learn to use it. Find 5 people within 100 miles that you trust with your life and stay in contact with them. Get a copy of the U.S. Constitution and read it. Eat less. Get a bicycle and 2 sets of spare tires. Ride it 10 miles a week. Consider what you would bring with you if you had to leave your home in 10 minutes and never return.
Now, I don't know if the story of John Titor is real. I don't think we'll ever know. But still, my family is taking his advice. We've got the first aid kit, the bicycle, and lots of ammo. We're prepared for the future that John described, at least as best as we can be. And it's okay if you don't believe that John Titor is from the future. It's a story that anyone would be skeptical of. But be skeptical of John Titor at your own risk. Me? I'm not willing to take the chance. The story of John Titor is still one of my favorites. Now, after I released that, I think that same day, I got an email from Joseph Matheny, and he confirmed that he created the John Titor story with some friends of his in the entertainment industry, but he couldn't tell me their names or who they work for.
Sketchy.
Maybe, but his email was very convincing. And then about a year ago, I got another email from someone else who said he was one of the guys who worked with Joseph Matheny, and their stories lined up. About a year ago, I got an email from another guy who said he worked with Matheny on the John Titor story, and this guy was in the entertainment industry, but he wouldn't let me share his name.
Sketchy.
I know, we have no definitive proof, but if I had to bet on it, I'd say Matheny's probably telling the truth. I don't believe the Habers.
Never believe a lawyer. They lie for a living.
Well, not every lawyer is.
Hey, how many lawyers does it take to screw in a light bulb?
How many?
3. 1 to climb it, 1 to shake it, and 1 to sue the ladder company.
I wish you were wrong, but that's pretty accurate. And just in case my attorney's watching, we're not talking about you, Will. You're the best.
Hey, what do you get when you cross a demon from the underworld with a lawyer?
What?
Another lawyer.
In America, you can sue anybody for anything. And if you don't have the means to fight the lawsuit, even if it's a lie, you lose. It's a broken system, and it really bothers me.
Where can you find a good lawyer?
Where?
The cemetery.
Ooh, that was a little rough.
Sue me.
They will. Okay, last episode is 114, the Kozyrev Mirror. Nikolai Kozyrev was a brilliant scientist. He had all these crazy ideas about time and space. He said time is actually a form of energy, and it doesn't really move from past to present to future. That's just the way we perceive it.
Yeah, but how does that...
The past, present, and future exist simultaneously. I explained it in the episode. And look, the Kozyrev Mirror is a device that anyone can build. And if you can build it, someone will. And someone did. And here's what happened.
3+15+00.
In December 1990, in a remote village above the Arctic Circle, 2 Russian scientists embarked on a daring experiment. Their goal was to enhance human superperception, or ESP. They built a device that could shield subjects from electromagnetic interference and amplify their biological energy. The device was a large tube of rolled aluminum with a chair inside. As soon as the device was built, strange phenomena occurred around the village. Disc-shaped lights hovered around the lab. Balls of energy appeared and disappeared. The northern lights became so bright and vivid that they seemed to have physical shape. Inside the lab, anyone who approached the device felt an unexplainable sense of dread. It took a long time to persuade anyone to try it. When the first subject finally sat in the chair, a flash of energy erupted that stunned everyone in the lab. The device worked. But maybe it worked a little too well. Not only did it boost people's psychic abilities, it also enabled them to view any place in the world. And soon, they could view any place in time. In fact, these experiments confirmed a theory first proposed in the 1950s, that time as we know it doesn't exist. The man did as the scientists told him. He stared at the curved wall of the aluminum chamber and tried to picture the ancient symbols that he studied before entering.
Whoa, wait a minute. What chamber? What are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about a study done in 1990 using a Kozyrev mirror.
Then why not just say that?
Well, I was trying to paint a picture, theater of the mind.
Theater of the mind?
Yeah.
Okay. Stupid.
Okay, that's enough.
Just tell the people what's happening.
I'm trying to tell them, but you won't let me tell them because you keep interrupting. The man had trouble concentrating. The more time he spent in the chamber, the more he felt an overwhelming sense of fear. It was instinctual. It was primal. Every fiber of his being told him that he needed to leave the machine now and never come back. Then there was the dizziness and nausea. He felt a deep, permeating sickness everywhere. Dr. Trofimov and Dr. Kaznachev, the scientists in charge of the experiment, told him this was common and that if he could push through it, he would be okay. There were a lot of volunteers taking place in the study in multiple sites in Russia. They communicated freely and openly, and they all had similar experiences. After an hour, the nausea started to ease. His dizziness became something that felt like floating. And the feeling of overwhelming fear became a feeling of overwhelming calm. His warped reflection in the shiny concave wall started to fade, though that wasn't the right word. Then he realized the wall was translucent. He could see through it. But this aluminum chamber was in a small concrete lab in a remote village in the Arctic Circle. But that's not what he saw through the wall. Whatever it was that he was seeing, it was a sunny day. He could hear birds and children playing. The more he relaxed, the more vivid this vision or experience or whatever this was became. Then, without any effort at all, he was through the chamber wall and into the vision. It was like he was there. It felt real. And even though he knew this was impossible, his instincts told him he was there. Next, he found himself floating behind a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old. He got closer and saw this was a boy walking on a sidewalk somewhere. The man tried to look around to get a sense of where he was, but he couldn't tell. It was like the edges of his vision were smeared. But the boy was in focus. Then the boy stopped. The man floated closer and recognized the boy's shoes, and he felt a wave of nostalgia. The boy's clothes, too, were familiar. The boy turned around, and the man felt electricity surge down his spine. The boy was him at 5 years old. The surroundings now came into focus. He was a few blocks away from his childhood home. The sounds became clearer. He could hear distant traffic that he knew was from a busy intersection a half-mile away. The sound of children playing was coming from a park nearby. He turned and saw the park and familiar faces playing. Without realizing it, His small aluminum chamber faded away, though he still had a sense that he was connected to it somehow, somewhere. And after a few seconds of contemplating this experience, the man realized that the boy seemed to be watching him. But that wouldn't make sense. The day the man stepped into was 30 years ago. But then the boy said, "Who are you?"
Whoa!
In an instant, the man snapped back to the present day. The portal closed and the vision ended.
That was theater of the mind, huh?
Yes.
Not bad.
That experience and dozens of others are documented in the case notes of this study. And that one isn't even the strangest. As far as scientists go, Nikolai Kozyrev isn't exactly a household name. But in the early 20th century, he was a prominent Russian physicist whose innovative and controversial theories are still debated today. Kozyrev made discoveries in astrophysics that were at first rejected but later proven true. In 1958, he reported volcanic activity on the moon. At first, this claim was dismissed by the scientific community. Later, the Apollo lunar missions proved Kozyrev was right. What?
Moon landing was fake.
Well, the volcanism was photographed by unmanned missions to the moon.
Okay.
But later confirmed when astronauts brought moon rocks back to Earth.
Fake! They filmed the moon landing on a soundstage in Burbank, California. The rocks are probably from the parking lot or some hippie hiking trail.
Volcanic rocks.
Yes.
In Burbank.
Yes.
Near the movie studios.
Yes.
Anyway, Kozyrev conducted extensive research on variable stars, stars that change brightness. He claimed stars emit torsion fields, an idea that was controversial. Now, torsion is a cornerstone of Kozyrev's work, and if his theories are proven correct, he might have solved, well, everything. Torsion, in simple terms, is the twisting of an object due to an applied torque, like wringing out a wet cloth. That's torsion in action. In theoretical physics, torsion is the twisting of space-time itself. You've heard of Einstein's theory of relativity, which describes gravity as not a force, but as the warping or curving of space and time by mass and energy. Now, this is always shown with the rubber sheet example. Imagine a rubber sheet stretched out, that if you put a bowling ball on it, representing a massive object like a planet or a star, it'll create a dip or curve in the sheet. Then if you drop marbles onto the sheet, representing smaller masses, they roll toward the bowling ball. That's general relativity. Now, the Einstein-Cartan theory upgrades this theory with a new feature, torsion, where the rubber sheet or space-time can be completely twisted. And to understand torsion, imagine you're holding one end of a slinky.
What walks downstairs, a loner in pairs, and makes a slinkety sound? A spring, a marvelous thing. Everyone knows a slinky.
Great, now that's going to be in my head all day.
It's fun for a girl or a boy.
Anyway, if you pull the ends of a slinky or a spring, it doesn't just bend, it also twists. In a similar way, the Einstein-Cartan theory proposes that the fabric of space-time doesn't just curve due to mass and energy, it can also twist. This twisting, according to Einstein, comes from the spinning of subatomic particles. But Kozyrev said that torsion is not caused by particles, it's caused by time. Stick with me. Mainstream science says space is empty, but Kozyrev disagreed. He claimed there's an invisible medium that fills the universe that he called the ether. The idea of the ether has been around since ancient times, but was mostly abandoned after 19th century experiments failed to detect it. But just because it wasn't detected doesn't mean it's not there. Think about birds flying in the air or fish in the water. These creatures need mediums to live and move.
I prefer not to be called a creature, but I won't be a snowflake about it. Go on.
So what about light traveling from a distant star to your eye? What medium does it move through? Well, mainstream science says it moves through nothing. Kozyrev said that's impossible. The medium is the ether. But the ether is not a static, passive medium. It's dynamic and interacts with everything. And time is not a passive dimension. Time possesses energy and structure. And this time energy flows through and interacts with the ether. Just like a school of fish creates waves and ripples in water, time creates ripples or waves of torsion in the ether.
Hey, it's not the size of the fish that counts, it's the motion of the ocean. You know what I'm saying, fellas?
Kozyrev believed time is a physical force, actively participating in the universe's existence. Time is the heartbeat of the universe. It creates energy that impacts matter in space. And because time has a physical structure and energy, it could have different densities. Time can move at different speeds. Time can be sped up, slowed down, and can even move in reverse. We perceive time as a river. In our daily life, we're floating down this river with the current of time carrying us from the past through the present and into the future. But a river influences the landscape it flows through and the life that grows around it and in it. Time is the same. Time energy influences everything like gravity and electromagnetism. Time also influences physical matter, including the Earth and the people who live on it. Time energy influences the spin of galaxies and the orbits of planets. Time energy feeds every star in the universe and influences the way they shine. But time energy also influences the weather on Earth, the way plants grow, and how your DNA decided what color your eyes would be. Now back to our raft. If you're in a raft on a river and you do nothing, you'll float along with the current. But with a little effort, you can paddle the raft to go faster down the river. You can make the raft stop. Though it takes work, you can also go backward against the flow of the river. And Kozyrev said time works the same way. We only perceive time at our current point as we float along, but the river behind us is still there. We pass through it, but it's still back there. And the river ahead is there too. We're not aware of it until we get there, but it's still up there waiting for us. Time, like the river, is always there. Past, present, and future all at once. When the torsion from time energy ripples through the ether, that information is transmitted instantaneously everywhere. The past, the present, and the future. And Kozyrev proved it. He conducted experiments with pendulums and gyroscopes to detect torsion fields and time energy. Using a telescope, Kozyrev found a star. The light from the star is really from the past, right? The light from a star 10,000 light years away takes 10,000 years to get here. Fine. Kozyrev detected torsion from that star 10,000 light years away. So that torsion was also from the past. Next, Kozyrev calculated where the star was at the current time. He detected torsion there too. In fact, the reading was much higher than the previous test. This means not only is torsion real, it moves much faster than light. It's instantaneous. Kozyrev went a step further. He calculated where the star would be in the distant future. He detected torsion there too. Kozyrev concluded that all time is simultaneous and infinite, that past and future are just metaphors. There is no past or future. There's only now. He also believed an interaction occurs between time and the human brain. That's why there are concepts such as intuition or foresight. This is human consciousness tapping into time energy. But time can also be influenced by human consciousness, by thoughts and by feelings, which can affect the physical world. And because time is a physical energy that can be sped up or slowed down, time can also be concentrated and redirected. Kozyrev then unveiled a theory that shocked the world. He said a mirror can be made that can bend absolutely anything, including time. Time travel is possible through a mirror. And then he built a machine to prove it. Time, according to Nikolai Kozyrev, is energy. Light, which is electromagnetic energy, can be redirected with a mirror. Time energy can also be redirected with a mirror. Specifically, Kozyrev used concave mirrors. And throughout history, concave mirrors have been used to concentrate light. The ancient Greeks and Romans were familiar with this. They used polished bronze or silver concave mirrors to focus sunlight and create fire for various purposes. These mirrors, known as burning mirrors, were used to light ceremonial torches and even ignite sacrificial fires. Some mirrors were even used as weapons by reflecting sunlight onto enemy ships that set them on fire. During the medieval and Renaissance periods, concave mirrors were used by scientists and alchemists to study optics and the properties of light. Isaac Newton used concave mirrors to concentrate light in his telescopes. Today, concave mirrors are everywhere. They're used in optical equipment like projectors and headlights and searchlights to focus and reflect light. Concave mirrors are also utilized in satellite dishes to collect and focus radio waves for communication. Kozyrev said a mirror was capable of bending almost anything. Microwaves, lasers, ultraviolet rays, and even particles from space. And time energy can be focused the same way. Kozyrev invented and even patented a device that would focus this energy. It was a thin sheet of metal bent into a spiral using geometry based on Fibonacci numbers, like most naturally occurring spirals are. A spiral, by the way, is the shape that results from torsion. Kozyrev tested different metals and found that time energy was most responsive to aluminum. His early prototype could, according to him, bend time at the microscopic level. Through the device, he claimed he could see 10 seconds into the future. It was at this point that the Soviet government classified his research as a state secret. His next experiment was to build a larger version. It would be a capsule with the interior wall entirely covered by this special mirror. Time inside the capsule would move faster. If you were inside, you could see or even visit the future. Other scientists throughout history may have intuitively come up with the same idea. Nostradamus had his metal egg, which was nothing more than a wraparound concave mirror. And Nostradamus made his predictions by gazing into a dark bowl of water that he actually called a magic mirror. And of course, a bowl of water is a concave mirror. In one of his notebooks, Leonardo da Vinci sketched what he called the mirror chamber. This was an octagonal room where each of the 8 walls were made of mirrors. By the time Kozyrev was building this new prototype, the Soviet government was keeping a very close eye on the research. The technology also ended up on the CIA's radar.
Of course it did.
And then, on February 27th, 1983,
Uh-oh.
just as he was about to test his new machine,
Oh no.
Nikolai Kozyrev suddenly and mysteriously died.
You gotta be f***ing kidding me.
The secret research into psychic phenomena by American and Soviet intelligence is not so secret anymore. The most famous American program was Project Stargate. This program explored various psychic abilities, but specifically concentrated on remote viewing, which is trying to visualize a distant target using only the mind. Now, the results of Project Stargate were mixed, but there were a few reported successes. The Soviet Union also engaged in psychic espionage, and they invested heavily in parapsychology and psychic phenomena. And the Soviets, according to declassified CIA documents, seem to have been more successful in their attempts. The project we talked about earlier, led by Dr. Travimov and Dr. Kaznachev, was one of these successes. The program began in December 1990 at the Institute of Experimental Medicine of the Academy of Sciences, Siberian branch. The equipment was assembled at a facility in Dixon, the northernmost settlement in Asia. The main piece of equipment is called a Kozyrev mirror, based on Kozyrev's research and patents. The mirror is a spiral-shaped metal structure the size of a small closet. It's designed to capture and focus psychic energy in the middle of the spiral. There, the occupant, called a psychonaut, embarks on their psychic journey. At least, that was the plan. As soon as the Kozyrev mirror was built, strange events started occurring in the facility and all over the town. And everything is documented in the book Cosmic Consciousness of Humanity by Drs. Kaznachev and Travimov. The book includes interviews with test subjects, transcripts of recordings, and illustrations of everything that happened during the study. It's really interesting and easy to read, and down below is a link where you can check it out for free. Now, as soon as the mirror was activated, the researchers noticed that around the device was an intense field of fear.
December 24th, 1990, Ape 1. Having entered the room, we felt a kind of emotional pressure, but we kept talking as though we didn't care about it. We just couldn't keep standing around the mirrors. The fear was so strong, more like a wild terror that couldn't be explained. It seemed like a real thing you could touch. None of us had ever had such a feeling before.
This feeling of instinctual dread was described by some as something almost physical that you could touch.
I had an unpleasant feeling. I felt cold and dizzy. My hands were trembling and my head grew heavy. Even the air of the room seemed different. The fear was so strong, it felt like a substance. It came from the Kozyrev space and filled up the whole room.
At the beginning of the experiment, nobody wanted to go near the mirror.
Once we opened the door, we got scared. It was like coming into cold water. The shiver came up as we got closer to the mirrors. I felt my head grow heavy. As I approached, the fear grew so strong that I was close to running away.
Powerful bursts of energy suddenly appeared above the device. The researchers called them plasmoids, and the way they described them, they sound like ball lightning. And outside the building, objects started appearing in the sky, and these were seen by people who worked at the lab as well as residents of the town.
Coming to the lab at 8:30 a.m., I saw a red glimmering circle above the building. It was there for a minute and then gone.
At 5:10, I saw a UFO flying from the north. The object had the form of an ellipse radiating red-white light. There were beams of light coming off the object as if it was searching for something. The UFO remained in sight for about 4 minutes, then the light went off and it was gone.
Suddenly I felt a kind of hypnosis. The feeling didn't last long. I saw a white glimmering object which looked like Saturn against the dark sky.
7 different UFOs were seen for months all over the area. Finally, some participants of the study worked up the courage to enter the Kozyrev mirror. And that's when things get really strange. Here's how the first experiment works. An operator sits in a Kozyrev mirror at the lab in Dixon. Another person sits in a mirror at the town of Novosibirsk, 1,400 miles away. The operator is then told to concentrate on a symbol and send that symbol to the receiver in Novosibirsk, and the results were surprising. On days when the Earth's magnetosphere was quiet, the success rate was between 0 and 10%. But when the magnetosphere was active, like during solar storms, the receiver could successfully detect the image being sent by the operator between 30 and 45% of the time. It seemed like human consciousness was somehow connected to the Earth's magnetic field. Now, this completely aligns with Nikolai Kozyrev's theory that sunspots and solar weather emit torsion waves that have far-reaching effects. And these waves influence many processes on Earth, from weather patterns to human consciousness. So another experiment was done. This time, 2 operators in 2 different Kozyrev mirrors in 2 different cities would concentrate on sending images into the Earth's magnetosphere. Then, 5,000 participants in 12 countries around the world would try to tune into this energy and view the symbol being sent. When the magnetosphere was active, the success rate jumped to 95%. Not only did this shock the scientists running the experiment, but it also shocked the CIA, who had been watching closely. And it turned out that children, specifically female children from spiritual and shamanic families, were extremely good at this. During one test, rather than thinking of an image, the mirror operator just thought of a number. The children were able to receive this number, look up the image, and draw what they saw. For symbol number 63, this is what they drew. And for symbol 32, this was seen. Over the next few months, volunteers learned to tolerate the Kozyrev mirror device for longer periods of time, and some people stayed in for 7 hours or more.
Being inside Kozyrev space, at first I felt my body shaking to and fro. I felt pressure from all around my head grew heavy. Later this feeling went, and I felt so light that it was like I was coming out of myself.
When they were inside the mirror, they started calling this Kozyrev space. And when they were in Kozyrev space, participants were feeling and seeing the same things.
At first, I felt my head grow heavy. It was also shaking a bit, and then it was gone. I saw people's faces flickering in my eyes. Then I saw black clouds. Then it was like I was falling through a black hole.
Almost everyone felt weightless, and then like they were flying.
I felt waves coming over my head. Then I felt like there was somebody else in the room. And then there was a series of images.
In their book, Travamov and Kaznachev included a chart of common experiences. Almost 90% of participants felt like they were flying. Most saw outer space, celestial bodies, and even UFOs. During longer sessions, another strange phenomenon was common: visualization and the manifestation of symbols. People started seeing symbols hovering in the air, and they're described as swirling and floating around the room. And each symbol emits an eerie glow like neon. But people weren't seeing these symbols in their minds. The symbols were appearing in the room. Even more amazing, people who were completely isolated from each other were seeing the same symbols. 2,000 distinct symbols were recorded. A linguist researched them and found that 80% of them came from ancient cultures. In fact, the most frequent symbols were from ancient Sumerian. The experiments continued for months and exceeded all expectations. Participants of the study who experienced Kozyrev space found that the effects lasted for a long time after leaving the mirrors. People were thinking more quickly, scoring higher on IQ tests. They had increased memory capacity. They were more creative. Some people had illnesses that were completely cured. Doctors Travamov and Kaznachev believed this technology was a breakthrough that could elevate all human consciousness, if the technology was handled carefully and responsibly. The scientists were very aware that using Kozyrev mirrors to activate superhuman abilities could be dangerous. The CIA shared the same fear. There was also another issue that had them worried. It turned out that when people were in Kozyrev space, they weren't alone. The more time people spent in Kozyrev space, the more they realized they were all having the same experiences. 75% of people saw UFOs, 70% saw extraterrestrial buildings, and 68% of people felt the presence of intelligent entities in Kozyrev space. They started calling these entities the observers.
I felt a kind of discomfort, which then turned into fear. I felt I had something cold right on my neck. I had a feeling somebody was watching, so I was afraid to open my eyes.
This observer could physically interact with people within Kozyrev space.
I closed my eyes. I wanted to sleep, but all of a sudden I felt somebody touching my hand. My body shivered with fear.
The observers were consistently described as humanoid, but not human. They were very bright, like made of light. No one was able to make out any features.
Being inside Kozyrev space, at first I felt nothing at all. In a few minutes, I saw a human shape. It was white all over. In 30 seconds, it was gone.
On a few occasions, an observer actually communicated.
Between the mirrors, I felt my head jerk, and something appeared. I was asked, "Who's that man with you?" I explained that he was a scientist. Then I asked them, "Who are you?" No answer came. I asked them, "Can you be seen?" And I saw human shapes.
I saw shining lights. I heard a voice asking me, "What do you want?" I answered, "I want to meet you." I only remember one word of the answer: League.
Most participants found communicating with the observers to be an unpleasant experience.
I saw a device with lights and an egg-shaped object. This ran in my mind. Come up. I answered, "I don't want to. I have fear of you." Then it was gone.
I saw a face. It wasn't that of a human. I got scared.
I was dizzy. I felt my head rolling around slowly. There were flashes of light. I asked who was there. The answer was, "I have no face. I am nothing and everything." Then I saw the eyes. The eyes were not very kind.
A few people saw more than UFOs in the sky. They saw UFOs from the inside.
I saw a light on which I could manage to get to a flying craft. It was a black hemisphere. I saw a few doors. I opened one door and found the beings looked human, but of smaller size. I asked them what they were doing, and they answered they kept watching us. I asked them where they were from. They said they came from a big star.
And one observer had a disturbing prediction for Earth.
My body got relaxed and light. As soon as I closed my eyes, I saw an object flying above. Then I was in a room I hadn't seen before. A man was standing in the center of the room. His face wasn't seen. He began to speak slowly. "Your planet is in danger. It is suffering. You have been in the mirrors too much. It's bad." Then he said, "There may be a disaster." I asked him when. No answer came.
Now, it's unclear whether this observer actually saw the disaster in the future or was just saying that we're on a path to disaster. But time travel was experienced by over 40% of the participants. Now, most of those experiences were the person at various stages of their life. Some view their life like watching a movie. Others were actually able to interact with and participate in their life in the past. Also, there were many people who observed or participated in historical events. One woman remembers being an advisor to Genghis Khan. Another felt his consciousness transfer to someone in the Middle Ages. Another to the Roman Empire. Remember, Nikolai Kozyrev believed that time was energy, and he believed that time energy could carry information to and from the physical world. Information was specifically abundant when objects change their state. For example, when water freezes solid and then melts and then turns into steam, this changing of state is very effective at encoding time energy. The site in Dixon was chosen for a few reasons, but one of those was permafrost. The researchers believed that when the water in the Arctic froze, information from that time it was frozen stayed trapped in the ice. And when the ice melted, that time energy was released. They thought some people may have tapped into this time energy, which gave them access to different points in time. Now, all this research is documented and available, and it's linked below. I'll also link to a Russian documentary that covered this pretty well. Now, Doctors Kaznachev and Travamov continued their work with Kozyrev mirrors for years and achieved an incredible amount of success. But despite the support of the Soviet and Russian governments, mainstream science journals wouldn't publish the work. In the West, research into Kozyrev mirrors has been completely ignored by everyone.
Except the CIA.
Right. Within the past couple of years, the CIA has released a few documents showing that they were following this research very closely. And it's been alleged they've conducted their own research into Kozyrev mirrors. There's one last document in the CIA database that covers Kozyrev mirrors and the potential for this technology to unlock human psychic abilities and awaken human consciousness. But that document, despite many Freedom of Information requests, remains classified. The research done in Siberia in the 90s using Kozyrev mirrors is amazing, but is it true? Well, it's a difficult story to debunk. On one hand, mainstream science doesn't take any of this seriously. On the other hand, major intelligence agencies do. Dr. Kaznachev and Dr. Travamov published their research in detail. They've given plenty of interviews. They say all of this happened and they don't seem to be lying. And why lie? Remember, their early research was funded by the Soviet state, and lying to that government seems unwise. But if their technology works, why isn't it more widespread? You absolutely can buy Kozyrev mirrors. You can buy blueprints to build your own. The process is well documented. There are even a couple of patents. The materials are not that expensive. Still, it's a technology that's way on the fringe. Now, whether you believe in the Kozyrev mirror or not comes down to, do you believe Nikolai Kozyrev's theory about time energy and the ether? Mainstream science doesn't believe in anything called the ether. But if instead of ether, Kozyrev called it dark matter or quantum foam or emergent space, maybe more people would have accepted his ideas. Now, Kozyrev had a few ideas rejected by mainstream science that were later proven to be true. What if he's right about this too? But using a mirror to reflect time, that sounds very science fiction-y. And it was, until last month. Scientists at the Advanced Science Research Center at the City University of New York conducted an experiment. They sent an electromagnetic wave through a metamaterial. These waves also have a time component that can be measured. The wave went in moving forward and came out moving backward. This is what's called a time reflection. And this was pure theory until now. So Nikolai Kozyrev was right. Time isn't as linear as we thought. Kozyrev also said time affects everything in the universe physically. Well, Dr. Travamov has been using Kozyrev's theories and Kozyrev mirrors to predict earthquakes. Again, sounds like science fiction, but geologists' accuracy in earthquake prediction is on average 8%. In 2018, Travamov's accuracy was as high as 61%. According to Travamov, we can use Kozyrev mirrors to predict dangerous weather, volcanic eruptions, and even solar storms. Kozyrev mirrors could be used to study our solar system, or even deep space. We can use it to look for landing sites, or help us search for extraterrestrial civilizations. Kozyrev mirrors could be used to slow down the rate of aging in the human body and cure incurable diseases. Now, despite all this potential, mainstream science won't take this technology seriously. Travamov and Kaznachev said this technology is so important and so profound that it should be made available to everyone and not left in the hands of an elite few. Kaznachev specifically worried about government or corporations abusing Kozyrev technology. And I think it's fair to worry about that, but I also think it's worth the risk. Kozyrev's theory, whether real or not, has a great message for humanity. That we're not bound by fate or determinism, but have the potential to shape our own reality with our choices and actions. It reveals that we're all connected to each other and to the universe through subtle fields of energy and information. And I'd like to have access to that information, wouldn't you? I think we, all of us, should download the plans, grab some sheets of aluminum, and see what we can discover. Because there are only two options. Democratize this technology so everyone can have access to it, so we can all experiment and exchange knowledge, perhaps allowing the entire human race to take an evolutionary leap forward. Or option two, Kozyrev's technology remains classified and under the control of the CIA. Not a hard choice for me. So I don't know what your plans are this weekend, but me, I'm going to Home Depot. Want to come with? Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. My name is AJ. On the line is Hecklefish.
How does an attorney sleep?
How?
First he lies on one side, and then he lies in the other.
Nice.
Oh, how are an apple and a lawyer alike?
How?
They both look good hanging from a tree.
Oof. Okay, that's enough.
Okay. What does a lawyer get when he takes Viagra?
What?
Taller.
This has been a Y-Files compilation episode. If you had fun or learned anything, do us a favor, like, subscribe, comment, share, all that stuff. And like every topic we cover on the channel, all these subjects were recommended by you. So if there's a story you want to hear or learn more about, go to yfiles.com/tips. Remember, the Y-Files is also a podcast. Twice a week, I post deep dives onto the subjects we cover here on the channel and subjects we can't cover on the channel because they're a little too spicy for YouTube. Those are called unredacted. Anyway, it's the Y-Files Operation Podcast, and it's available everywhere you get your podcasts. If you want more Y-Files in your life, check out our Discord. Thousands of people on there every day, 24/7, talking about the same crazy stuff that we talk about here on the channel. And some crazier stuff, actually. Anyway, Discord is fun and it's free to join. Check it out. And special thanks to our patrons who make this channel possible. Without you, there'd be no Y-Files. So I dedicate every episode to you. Thank you for your support. And if you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a member on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you support the channel, you get access to merch only available to members, you get to see videos early without commercials, plus you get 2 live streams every week just for you. Even when we're on break like this, I still stream live for the Patreon members. So check that out, it's only $3. Another great way to support the channel is grab something from the Y-Files store.
Grab a Hecklefish t-shirt, a visible coffee mug, or a hoodie, or one of those things. Am I still... Hello? Hello? Forget it.
All right, those are the plugs. Until next time, be safe, be kind, and know that you are appreciated. More weeks.
In Area 51, a secret code inside the Bible said I would. I love my UFOs and paranormal fun, as well as music, so I'm singing it like I should. But then another conspiracy theory becomes the truth, my friends, and it never ends. No, it never ends. The crap cat and got stuck inside Mel's hole with MK Ultra, being only too aware. Did Stanley Kubrick fake the moon landing alone on a film set, or were the shadow people there? The Roswell aliens just fought the smiling man, I'm told, and his name was Cold. And I can't believe I'm dancing with the Hecklefish on Thursday nights, Wednesday J2, and the Wi-Fi's have me all through the night. All I ever wanted was to just hear the truth, so the Wi-Fi's have me all through the night. The Mothman sightings and the solar storm still come to Agatha, the secret city underground. Mysterious number stations, planets Earth 02, Project Stargate, and what the Dark Watchers found. In a simulation, don't you worry though. The Black Knight satellite, it told me so. I can't believe I'm dancing with the Hecklefish on Thursday nights, Wednesday J2, and the Wi-Fi's have me all through the night. All I ever wanted was to just hear the truth, so the Wi-Fi's have me all through the night. Hecklefish on Thursday nights, Wednesday J2, and the Wi-Fi's have me all through the night. Bye.